You stand on a jagged ridge in the Andes Mountains, 4,000 meters above the sea. The air is so thin it stings your lungs, but as you press a bundle of bitter green leaves against your cheek, a subtle warmth spreads through your veins. You do not know it yet, but this humble plant holds a power that will eventually reshape the world. Fast forward 3 centuries. You are in a dimly lit Victorian laboratory, watching a chemist isolate a shimmering white alkaloid that promises to cure every human ailment. Now move again. You are in a neon-drenched club in the 80s, surrounded by a mountain of white dust that fuels both ecstasy and total ruin. This is the story of a leaf that became a god, a medicine that became a curse, and a powder that toppled entire dynasties. Welcome to the high and the crash. You are standing on a narrow, rocky ledge, high above the world you once knew. The air here is thin and cold, so sharp it feels like it is slicing into your lungs with every desperate breath. To your left, a sheer granite wall rises toward a sky so blue it looks bruised. To your right, the earth simply vanishes, dropping away into a swirling abyss of mist and jagged stone. You are in the heart of the Andes Mountains, 3 miles above the level of the sea. Your heart is thumping a frantic, irregular rhythm against your ribs. Your legs feel like lead, and your head is spinning with a dull, throbbing ache that makes your vision blur. This is the soroche, the mountain sickness. It is the feeling of your body slowly starving for oxygen in a place where the gods intended only eagles to dwell. Every step is an act of will. Every exhale is a surrender. But as you struggle, you notice something. Ahead of you, a man is walking. He is not gasping for air. He is not pausing to clutch at his knees. He is an indigenous traveler, his skin weathered by the sun and the biting wind into a landscape of deep lines and bronzed toughness. He carries a heavy pack on his back, yet he moves with the rhythmic grace of someone walking through a mountain pass. He looks back at you, sees your distress, and reaches into a small, brightly woven wool bag hanging at his hip. He pulls out a handful of small, oval leaves. They are dried and brittle, a dull olive green that looks unremarkable. He holds them out to you with a solemn nod. This is your introduction to the coca leaf. This is not the white, crystalline powder of the modern underworld. It is not the chemical high of a nightclub or a back alley. What you are holding is a sacrament. It is medicine. It is, to the people of these mountains, the very breath of life itself. You take the leaves. Following his lead, you tuck them into the side of your cheek. You do not swallow them. You let them rest there, softening with your saliva. Then he offers you a small, dark piece of something that looks like hardened clay or ash. This is the lipta, an alkaline substance made from the ashes of burned quinoa stalks or ground seashells. You break off a tiny piece and press it into the wad of leaves. At first, there is nothing but a bitter, grassy taste, like strong green tea or the smell of a mown field. But then, a subtle tingling begins. Your tongue starts to feel numb. The back of your throat cools. And then, something miraculous happens. The crushing weight on your chest begins to lift. The pounding in your temples recedes into a distant, manageable hum. Your legs, which felt like they were sinking into the earth, suddenly feel light. The exhaustion that threatened to collapse your knees is replaced by a steady, quiet clarity. You are not high in the way you might imagine. You are simply awake. You are capable. You are, for the first time since you started this climb, truly present. This is the ancestral breath of the Andes. For thousands of years, long before the first European ship ever sighted the coast of South America, this plant was the heartbeat of a civilization. To understand the history of cocaine, you must first strip away the modern stigma and the blood-soaked headlines. You must go back to the beginning, to the sacred relationship between a people and a plant that they believed was a gift from the divine. The coca bush, known scientifically as Erythroxylum coca, is a stubborn and hardy shrub. It thrives in the rugged transitions between the high Andean peaks and the humid, low-lying jungles of the Amazon basin. It clings to steep hillsides where little else can grow, its roots diving deep into the rocky soil. To the people of the Andes, it was not just a plant. It was Mama Coca, a living spirit that bridged the gap between the earthly realm and the world of the spirits. You see, in the high Andes, life is a constant struggle against the elements. The environment is beautiful, but it is also brutal. It demands everything from you. Hunger is a constant shadow, and the cold is a predator that never sleeps. Coca was the shield against these forces. It suppressed the appetite, allowing a laborer to work from dawn until dusk on nothing more than a handful of toasted corn. It provided a burst of metabolic heat, keeping the blood moving in the freezing nights. It was the fuel that built empires. Imagine the Great Inca Road, a marvel of engineering that stretched for thousands of miles across some of the most difficult terrain on the planet. You were standing on one of its polished stone sections, watching a runner, a chasca, fly past you. These were the imperial messengers of the Inca Empire. They were trained from childhood to run at full speed across the mountains, carrying quipus, the knotted strings that served as the empire records. A chasca could cover over 100 miles in a single day, a feat that seems superhuman to us today. But they did not do it on bread and water alone. In the small pouch at their side, they carried the sacred leaf. It was their endurance. It was their oxygen. Without coca, the administrative machinery of the Inca Empire would have ground to a halt. The king in Cusco could not have received fresh fish from the coast or reports from the northern frontiers of Ecuador without the chemical assistance of the leaf that allowed his messengers to defy the limits of human biology. Yet, the leaf was more than just a biological tool. As you walk further into this ancient world, you begin to see it everywhere. It is woven into the very fabric of social life. When two people meet on a mountain path, they do not just say hello. They exchange leaves. It is a gesture of peace, a way of saying that we share the same breath, the same struggle. It is the social lubricant of the Andes, more important than gold or silver. You watch a village elder prepare for a ceremony. He does not simply toss the leaves into his mouth. He selects 3 perfect leaves, holding them by their stems in a fan shape. This is the Kintu. He raises them toward the snow-capped peaks, the apis, which are the mountain spirits. He blows gently across the leaves, a soft whistle of breath that carries his prayer to the gods. He thanks the earth, the Pachamama, for her bounty. Only after the spirits have been honored does he begin to chew. In the eyes of the Inca, the coca leaf was a divine gift brought to earth by the children of the sun. In one of their most beautiful myths, it was said that the first Inca rulers were given the leaf to make the people forget their misery, to give them the strength to build their monuments, and to fill the hungry with a sense of fullness. It was a plant of the elite, initially reserved for the royalty, the priests, and the chosen women of the sun temples. To be allowed to chew coca was a mark of high status, a reward for great service to the state. But as the empire grew, so did the reach of the leaf. It became the currency of the mountains. It was used to pay workers, to seal marriages, and to bury the dead. When a person passed away, their family would place coca leaves in their mouth and in their grave, ensuring they had the energy and the spirit to navigate the long journey through the underworld. You sit down by a small fire as the sun begins to dip behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of violet and deep orange. The man who gave you the leaves sits across from you. He explains that the leaf is also a seer. He takes a handful of leaves and casts them onto a woven cloth. He studies the way they land, the way they overlap, and the direction their stems point. To him, the leaves are a language. They can predict the weather, the success of a harvest, or the outcome of a journey. This is not superstition to him. It is a deep, ancestral science. As you watch the smoke from the fire curl into the cold air, you realize that for these people, there is no separation between the plant and their identity. It is not a drug to be abused. It is a companion to be respected. There is no concept of addiction in this world because the leaf is used in its natural form. Its alkaloids release slowly and gently in combination with the alkaline ash. It does not provide a sudden, violent rush that crashes into a dark depression. Instead, it provides a steady, glowing embers of vitality. But the world is about to change. Far to the east, across the great ocean, ships are sailing. They carry men with a different kind of hunger. Men who do not value the balance of the mountains or the sacred nature of the leaf. They will see the Andes not as a home for spirits, but as a vault of silver and gold. And when they arrive, they will look at the green leaf in the cheeks of the indigenous people with a mixture of horror and fascination. They will try to ban it, calling it a work of the devil, an obstacle to the spread of their new religion. But soon they will realize something that the Inca knew all along. They will realize that without the leaf, the work does not get done. They will realize that the leaf is the only thing that allows a man to survive the hellish conditions of the silver mines. And in that realization, the sacred leaf will begin its long, tragic transformation. The transition from the divine to the commercial is about to begin. The breath of the Andes is about to be measured, taxed, and eventually refined into something the world could never have imagined. But for now, in this moment by the fire, the air is still. The mountain is quiet, and the leaf is still a gift, a green bridge between a person and the gods, keeping them alive in a world that is breathtakingly beautiful and devastatingly harsh. You take one last breath of the thin, cold air, feeling the steady hum of the leaf in your veins, and you realize that you are standing at the end of an era. The age of the sacred leaf is reaching its peak, just as the shadows of a new, more chaotic world begin to stretch across the mountains. The leaves in your pouch are dry and light, but they carry the weight of thousands of years of history. They are the silent witnesses to the rise and fall of civilizations. They have seen the construction of stone cities that defy gravity and the quiet prayers of a million shepherds. As the fire dies down to glowing coals, you understand that this plant was never meant to be a curse. It was a tool of survival, a way to endure the impossible. As we move forward into the darker chapters of this story, remember this feeling of the high Andean wind and the quiet strength of the green leaf. Remember the dignity of the people who first discovered its power. Because the story of cocaine does not begin in a laboratory or a cartel warehouse. It begins here, in the thin, holy air of the mountains, with a plant that was once believed to be the very soul of the earth. The transformation from a mountain sacrament to a global commodity is a journey paved with ambition, misunderstanding, and the relentless pursuit of profit. You can still feel the numbness on your tongue, a physical reminder of the plant's potency, as you prepare to witness the arrival of those who would turn this ancient blessing into a modern catastrophe. The peaceful silence of the peaks is about to be shattered by the sound of bells and the clatter of Spanish armor. The sacred leaf is about to meet the world. You are standing on a precipice in the high Andes, over 13,000 feet above the level of the sea. The air here is so thin it feels like glass in your lungs, sharp and cold. Below you, the world is a chaotic tapestry of emerald valleys and jagged granite peaks that seem to scrape the very floor of heaven. It is the year 1532. You are not a traveler, but a witness to a collision of two worlds that will change the course of human history and the chemistry of the human brain forever. To your left, you see the remnants of the Incan Empire, a civilization that mastered the verticality of the earth. To your right, you hear the clank of steel and the heavy, rhythmic thud of horses. The Spanish have arrived. You watch as the conquistadors, led by Francisco Pizarro, move through the mountain passes. They are sweating under their iron breastplates, their faces pale and gaunt from the altitude sickness they do not yet understand. They look at the local people, the subjects of the Inca, and they see something that fills them with a mixture of disgust and curiosity. Every man they encounter has a bulging cheek, a constant, rhythmic chewing motion that never seems to stop. When these men breathe out, the air carries a faint, grassy scent, like sun-dried hay and bitter tea. They are chewing the coca leaf, the sacred plant of the sun god. In this moment, you are seeing the first cracks in a divine tradition. For the Inca, coca was the bridge between the human and the holy. It was a gift from the gods, reserved for the nobility, the priests, and the runners who carried messages across thousands of miles of mountain road. It was a substance of ritual, used to read the future in the patterns of fallen leaves, or to offer as a sacrifice to the mountain spirits. But to the Spanish, it looked like nothing more than a pagan superstition. You listen as the early Spanish chroniclers, men like Vicente de Valverde, denounce the plant. They call it a delusion of the devil. They believe it is a source of spiritual corruption that keeps the indigenous people tethered to their ancient gods. But as you follow the Spanish deeper into the heart of the Andes, you see their moral certainty begin to crumble. They have come for gold and silver, and they have found it in quantities that defy the imagination. You find yourself standing at the base of a mountain known as Cerro Rico, the rich hill in the city of Potosí. This is the highest city in the world, a place where the wind screams through the streets and nothing grows. It is a bleak, barren wasteland, yet it is about to become the center of the global economy. You look up at the mountain, and it looks like a giant, rust-colored hive. Thousands of holes have been bored into its sides. This is the mountain that eats men. The Spanish have discovered that the silver veins here are so rich they could pave the road to Madrid with bullion. But there is a problem. The work is grueling. The air is so thin that a European man can barely walk a mile without gasping for breath, let alone swing a heavy pickaxe for 12 hours a day in the suffocating darkness of a mine shaft. You enter the mines with the workers. The heat is oppressive, rising from the depths of the earth. The dust of pulverized rock fills your throat. You see the indigenous laborers forced into the META system, a form of state-mandated draft labor. They are starving, exhausted, and shivering in the damp cold of the tunnels. And then you see the change. You see a foreman hand out a small bag of dried green leaves. The workers take them eagerly. They mix the leaves with a bit of alkaline ash or lime, tuck the quid into their cheeks, and begin to chew. Within minutes, the transformation is visible. You see the exhaustion lift from their eyes. Their heart rates climb, their bodies warm up, and the gnawing hunger in their stomachs vanishes. They return to the rock face with a renewed, almost mechanical energy. The Spanish overseers stand back and watch, their arms crossed. They realize something profound. Without this green leaf, the the silver will stay in the mountain. Without the silver, the Spanish Empire will go bankrupt. You are witnessing the birth of a new kind of economy. The leaf is no longer a sacred bridge to the divine. It has become a fuel. It is the prehistoric version of the battery, the only thing that allows the human machine to function in conditions that should be fatal. The Spanish crown, which initially wanted to ban the leaf as a tool of idolatry, suddenly finds itself in a dilemma. If they ban coca, they lose the silver. If they lose the silver, they lose their power over Europe. The church, too, finds itself performing a spectacular about-face. You walk through the growing streets of Potosi and see the grand cathedrals being built with the labor of the very people the Spanish are exploiting. The priests who once called the leaf a work of the devil now realize that they can tax it. They begin to collect a tithe on every basket of coca leaves sold in the markets. By the late 1500s, the coca trade in the Andes is worth more than the silver itself in terms of local commerce. It has become the most valuable commodity in the New World. You see the emergence of a new class of people, the coca lords. These are Spanish entrepreneurs who own vast plantations, known as cocales, in the warm, humid valleys of the Yungas. They grow the plant in massive quantities, using forced labor to harvest the delicate leaves. You see the long caravans of llamas, thousands of them, winding their way up the mountain paths from the tropical lowlands to the high-altitude markets. Each llama carries sacks of the green gold. The scale of the industry is staggering. By some estimates, the city of Potosi alone consumes over 100,000 baskets of coca a year. As you walk through the markets, you see how the leaf has become a form of currency. It is used to pay for food, for cloth, and for the very taxes the Spanish demand. The indigenous people have been trapped in a cycle where they must work the mines to earn the leaves they need to survive the work in the mines. It is a closed loop of exploitation, powered by the alkaloids of the plant. You notice the physical toll this takes. The people you see are no longer the proud citizens of an empire that once spanned the continent. They are cogs in a colonial machine. Their mouths are stained green, their teeth worn down by the abrasive lime used to activate the leaves. They are living on a chemical loan, borrowing energy from their own bodies that they can never truly pay back. The leaf that once connected them to their ancestors is now the chain that binds them to their masters. But there is a strange irony in this immersion. While the Spanish are using the leaf to power their empire, they are also terrified of it. They do not chew it themselves. To them, it is a marker of inferiority, a sign of the savage. They write home to Spain about the miraculous properties of the leaf, but they do it with a sense of distance. They are the first to encounter the raw power of what we now call cocaine, but they lack the scientific language to understand it. They see the effect, but they cannot see the molecule. You stand in the square of Potosi as the sun sets. The mountain glows a deep, bloody red in the fading light. You see the wealth of an empire flowing out toward the coast, packed onto ships destined for Seville. The silver will fund the wars of Philip II, it will build the Spanish Armada, and it will trigger a global inflation that will reshape the European economy. And all of it, every single bar of silver, is stained with the juice of the green leaf. The Spanish have successfully colonized the divine. They have taken a plant that was the center of a spiritual world and turned it into an industrial lubricant. They have created a system where human life is converted into metal through the mediation of a botanical stimulant. This is the moment where the history of the drug truly begins, not as a medicine or a recreation, but as a tool of geopolitical power. You feel the weight of this history as you look at the faces of the miners returning from their shifts. They are hollowed out, their eyes reflecting the darkness of the tunnels. They reach into their pouches for one last handful of leaves to numb the pain of the night. The sacred leaf has met the world, and the world has found a way to use it until there is nothing left. The silver is flowing, the green is growing, and the seeds of a future global obsession have been planted in the blood and the dust of the Andes. The transformation is complete. The plant of the gods has become the servant of the crown. You step out of the humid, emerald shadows of the Andean foothills and find yourself transported across a vast, churning ocean. The air here is different. It is no longer thick with the scent of damp earth and crushed vegetation. Instead, as you walk through the cobbled streets of mid-19th century Germany, the air is heavy with the smell of coal smoke, damp wool, and the sharp, acidic tang of industrial progress. You are no longer in a world where the leaf is a gift from the gods. You are in the world of the microscope, the glass beaker, and the flickering gas lamp. This is the era of the laboratory, a place where nature is not worshipped, but dissected. You push open a heavy oak door and enter a room that feels worlds away from the sun-drenched slopes of Peru. The walls are lined with shelves of dark glass bottles, each containing a mystery of the natural world reduced to its chemical essence. Here, the green leaves that you once saw tucked into the cheeks of high-altitude runners have arrived in burlap sacks, but they are changed. They are brittle, brown, and dusty. They have survived a journey of thousands of miles, tossed in the dark holds of clipper ships, losing their potency with every league traveled. For decades, European scientists have tried to understand why these leaves, so revered in the New World, seem to lose their magic by the time they reach the Old World. They want the power, but they cannot find the key. You stand beside a workbench cluttered with the tools of a new priesthood. There are glass retorts with long, swan-like necks, porcelain evaporating dishes, and the constant, rhythmic hiss of a Bunsen burner. In 1855, a chemist named Friedrich Getz sits where you are now. He is frustrated. He knows there is a secret hidden within the fibrous veins of the erythroxylon leaf, but it is elusive. He grinds the leaves, boils them, and treats them with lead acetate. He filters and he waits. Eventually, he manages to isolate a small amount of oily residue that crystallizes into something he calls erythroxylene. It is a breakthrough, a first crack in the door, but the world does not yet take notice. The substance is impure, and its true nature remains shrouded in the fog of incomplete chemistry. But the momentum of the 19th century is unstoppable. You watch as the years tick forward to 1859. A great ship, the Nevera, returns to Europe from a scientific expedition around the globe. On board are crates filled with thousands of high-quality coca leaves, carefully preserved and destined for the University of Göttingen. These leaves are handed to a young, brilliant doctoral student named Albert Niemann. This is the moment where the history of the world shifts. You are standing over Niemann's shoulder as he begins his work. He is meticulous. He is not interested in the myths of the Incas or the spiritual connection between the plant and the earth. He wants the pure alkaloid. You watch him work through the long nights, the laboratory filled with the sweet, cloying scent of ether. He dissolves the plant material in alcohol, he adds diluted sulfuric acid, and he watches as the liquid separates. He is hunting for a ghost. Imagine the silence in that room, broken only by the occasional clink of glass. Niemann uses a process of extraction that involves multiple stages of washing and filtering. He is stripping away the chlorophyll, the waxes, and the plant sugars. He is looking for the white soul of the leaf. Finally, after weeks of painstaking labor, he sees it. At the bottom of a glass dish, as the solvents evaporate, tiny, shimmering crystals begin to form. They look like frost on a window pane. They are colorless, transparent, and beautiful in a cold, clinical way. You reach out, as Neiman did, and pick up a small amount of this new substance on the tip of your finger. It is not a leaf anymore. It is a concentrated chemical force. When Neiman placed a bit of this powder on his tongue, he recorded a sensation that would change medicine forever. He noted that it had a bitter taste, but more importantly, it produced a peculiar effect. His tongue went numb. The prickling sensation was followed by a total loss of feeling in the area the powder touched. He described it as a feeling of coldness. He had isolated the active principle, and he gave it the name that would ring through history: cocaine. Neiman did not live long enough to see the chaos his discovery would unleash. He died shortly after his breakthrough, but the torch was passed to his colleague Wilhelm Lossen. You watch as Lossen continues the work, refining the process and determining the actual chemical formula of the substance. By the mid-1860s, the secret is out. The laboratory has done what the Spanish conquistadors could never do. It has conquered the leaf. It has extracted the essence of the Andes and turned it into a stable, shippable, and incredibly potent white powder. Now, place yourself in the offices of a small pharmaceutical company in Darmstadt, Germany. This company belongs to the Merck family. For generations, they have been apothecaries, but they are now becoming something much larger. They are the pioneers of the industrial drug age. They see the potential in Neiman's discovery. They realize that if they can produce this white powder in large quantities, they can sell it to a world that is obsessed with new remedies and the promise of scientific miracles. The transformation is profound. When the leaf was chewed in the mountains, the release of the alkaloid was slow, tempered by the fiber of the plant and the alkaline lime used by the chewers. It was a steady, manageable flow of energy. But here, in the vials of Merck and other emerging giants, the substance is concentrated. A single gram of this powder contains the power of hundreds of leaves. It is a refined weapon of chemistry. You walk through the factory floors where the air is now thick with the dust of these crystals. The production is no longer measured in milligrams, but in pounds. The vials are packed into wooden crates, labeled in elegant script, and shipped to doctors and chemists across Europe and America. You see the excitement in the eyes of the medical establishment. They believe they have found the ultimate cure. It is a local anesthetic that allows for surgeries on the eye and the jaw without the patient screaming in agony. It is a treatment for depression. It is a cure for morphine addiction. The white powder is hailed as a gift of modern science, a testament to the fact that man can improve upon nature. As a guide through this history, I want you to feel the tension of this moment. In the 1870s and early 1880s, there is no stigma. There is no shadow of the cartel or the street corner. There is only the gleam of the laboratory glass and the promise of a pain-free world. You see the vials sitting on the mahogany desks of the most respected physicians in Vienna, London, and New York. You see it being added to wines, to tonics, and to throat lozenges. The transition from the green leaf to the white vial represents the ultimate shift in human perception. The plant has been stripped of its cultural context, its religious significance, and its natural balance. It has become a commodity, a pure chemical product that can be bought and sold by the milligram. You can almost feel the vibration of the world speeding up. The 19th century was a time of steam engines and telegraphs, a time when everything was getting faster, louder, and more intense. Cocaine was the perfect drug for this era. It was the fuel for the ambitious, the remedy for the overworked, and the wonder drug for a society that believed it could engineer its way out of any problem. You look at the small, clear vial in your hand. Inside, the white crystals catch the light of the gas lamp, sparkling like crushed diamonds. It looks so clean. It looks so professional. It is the triumph of the German laboratory, the pinnacle of organic chemistry. But as you stand there in the quiet of the lab, you might notice something. The numbness Niemann felt on his tongue was not just a medical curiosity. It was a warning. By isolating the power of the plant, the chemists had removed the brakes. They had created something that the human brain was not designed to handle in such a concentrated form. The laboratory extraction was the birth of the modern drug. It took a sacred, traditional botanical and turned it into a global industrial product. The powder that corrupted dynasties did not start in a jungle hut. It started here, among the polished brass and sterile glass of the 19th century scientist. The world was now ready to embrace the white vial, unaware that the numbness it provided would soon spread far beyond the tongue, reaching into the very heart of the coming century. The stage is set, the product is pure, and the vials of white are ready to be uncorked. You step out of the biting wind of a Viennese winter and into the heavy, mahogany-scented halls of the Vienna General Hospital. It is 1884. The air here is a thick mixture of carbolic acid, coal smoke, and the faint, sweet rot of untreated infections. You pull your wool coat tighter around your shoulders, your boots clicking rhythmically against the cold stone tiles. You are here to find a man who believes he has discovered the key to the human soul, or at the very least, the ultimate cure for the human condition. You find him in a small, cramped office cluttered with books and specimen jars. He is young, only 28 years old, with a dark, trimmed beard and eyes that burn with a restless, almost desperate ambition. This is Dr. Sigmund Freud. At this moment in history, he is not the world-famous father of psychoanalysis. He is a struggling neurologist, deeply in debt, frustrated by the slow pace of his career, and longing to make a name for himself that will allow him to finally marry his beloved Martha Bernays. You watch as he reaches for a small, wax-sealed glass vial. Inside is a gram of white, crystalline powder. It has come all the way from the Merck pharmaceutical company in Darmstadt, Germany. At nearly $2 a gram, it is a staggering expense for a man with his meager salary. But Freud views this as an investment in his future. This is cocaine. To Freud, it is not a street drug or a social pariah. It is a magical substance, a pharmaceutical wonder that promises to banish fatigue, erase depression, and provide a shortcut to the heights of intellectual clarity. He measures out a small dose, perhaps 1/20th of a gram, and stirs it into a glass of water. You see him lift the glass, his hands steady, and drink. You wait with him in the silence of the office, the only sound being the ticking of a clock and the distant rumble of carriages on the cobblestone streets outside. Soon the transformation begins. You see the color return to his pale face. His posture straightens. The weary, anxious lines around his eyes soften and disappear. He begins to talk, and his voice is filled with an infectious, vibrant energy. He tells you that he feels a sudden lightness, a sense of supreme well-being. He feels, in his own words, like a lion. There is no intoxication, he insists. There is simply the feeling of being your best self, a version of yourself that is incapable of feeling pain, hunger, or doubt. This is the beginning of what history will call the cocaine papers. Over the next few years, Freud will write a series of glowing essays and letters about this drug. You watch him hunched over his desk, the gaslight flickering as he scribbles furiously onto parchment. He is writing his first major work on the subject, titled Über Coca, or On Coca. In this paper, Freud acts as a passionate advocate. You hear his voice through the scratching of his pen. He recommends cocaine for almost everything. For indigestion, for melancholia, for the persistent coughs of the winter season. He suggests it can be used to improve athletic performance and to sustain soldiers on long marches. Most significantly, he proposes it as a miracle cure for addiction itself. He believes that cocaine can be used to wean patients off of morphine and alcohol, replacing a destructive habit with what he perceives as a harmless and beneficial one. You see him sending samples to his friends and colleagues. He even sends some to his fiancée, Martha, telling her it will make her strong and give her red cheeks. He uses it himself before social gatherings to overcome his shyness and during long nights of study to keep his mind sharp. He is a man convinced he has found a panacea, a gift from the gods that will revolutionize medicine and secure his place in the annals of history. But as you stay by his side, the atmosphere begins to shift. The initial glow starts to fade, replaced by a creeping, cold reality. You follow Freud as he visits one of his closest friends, a brilliant physiologist named Ernst von Fleischl-Marxow. Fleischl-Marxow is a man in agony. Years ago, he cut his thumb during a dissection, leading to a chronic infection and a series of amputations that have left him with agonizing nerve pain. Like many in his position, he has become desperately addicted to morphine. Freud, with the best of intentions, offers his friend the new miracle cure. He tells Fleischl-Marxow that cocaine will allow him to give up the morphine without suffering the horrors of withdrawal. You watch as the experiment begins. First, it seems to work. Fleischl-Marxow is ecstatic. He feels reborn. But then the doses have to be increased. Then they have to be increased again. The scene in Fleischl-Marxow's bedroom becomes a nightmare that you are forced to witness. The air is stagnant and smells of sweat and desperation. The brilliant scientist is no longer the man he was. He is injecting cocaine directly into his veins, thousands of milligrams a day. You see him shivering, his eyes darting toward the corners of the room. He begins to describe things that aren't there. He feels insects crawling under his skin, a phenomenon that will later be known as formication or cocaine bugs. He claws at his flesh until he bleeds, trying to dig out the phantom parasites. Freud sits by his bed, watching his friend descend into a profound, drug-induced psychosis. The panacea has become a poison. The cure is far worse than the original disease. You see the shadow of guilt begin to fall across Freud's face as he realizes that he has not saved his friend, but has instead accelerated his destruction. Fleischl-Marxow will eventually die a broken, delirious man, and his decline will be one of the heaviest burdens Freud ever carries. As the 1880s progress, the medical community begins to turn on Freud and his white powder. You hear the whispers in the medical journals and the heated debates in the lecture halls. Other doctors are reporting cases of cocaine addiction and heart failure. A prominent physician named Albrecht Erlenmeyer publishes a scathing critique, calling cocaine the third scourge of humanity, alongside morphine and alcohol. He accuses Freud of unleashing a dangerous demon upon the world. You watch as Freud tries to defend himself, but his voice is increasingly thin and unconvincing. He stops writing about cocaine. He stops recommending it to his patients. The dream of the miracle drug is crumbling around him. He realizes that the very qualities he praised, the suppression of hunger and the artificial boost of energy, come at a devastating cost to the human nervous system. Eventually, you see him quietly distance himself from his cocaine papers. He never fully retracts them, but he stops speaking of them. He turns his back on the laboratory and the syringe, and instead turns his attention toward the invisible world of the unconscious mind. You could argue that the failure of cocaine pushed him toward the development of psychoanalysis, seeking a way to heal the mind through words rather than through dangerous chemicals. But the damage is done. The genie is out of the bottle. Thanks in part to the enthusiastic endorsement of a young Viennese doctor, the medical world and the public have been introduced to the concentrated power of the coca leaf. The era of cocaine as a harmless household remedy is reaching its peak, even as the dark clouds of addiction begin to gather on the horizon. You leave the dim office of Dr. Freud and step back out into the Vienna night. The snow is falling again, muffling the sounds of the city. You realize that you have just witnessed one of the most significant turning points in the history of medicine and addiction. The white powder that promised to bring light to the human mind has instead revealed its capacity for profound darkness. As you walk away, you can't help but think of the vials and the letters and the desperate scratchings of Flacial Marxo against his own skin. The powder is no longer just a substance. It is a force that has begun to corrupt the very people who sought to master it. The era of the panacea is over, and the era of the epidemic is about to begin. You are standing on a cobblestone street in Paris in the year 1863. The air is damp and smells of coal smoke and rain, but the city is alive with the hum of the Belle Époque. You pull your coat tight against the chill and step into a warm, wood-paneled pharmacy. The shelves are lined with ornate glass jars, each containing mysterious powders and dried herbs from the furthest reaches of the globe. Behind the counter stands a man with a sharp mind and an even sharper eye for business. His name is Angelo Mariani. He is not a drug dealer in the way you might imagine one today. He is a chemist, a gentleman, and a marketing genius. And he is about to hand you a glass of something that will change the world. He pours a deep, ruby-red liquid into a crystal glass. It looks like a standard Bordeaux wine, but as you lift it to your lips, the aroma is different. It is earthy, slightly bitter, and carries a hint of something exotic. This is Vin Mariani. It is a simple mixture of fine French wine and coca leaf extract. You take a sip. Within minutes, the fatigue of your walk through the city begins to melt away. Your mind feels unnaturally sharp. Your heart beats with a steady, confident rhythm. You feel, quite simply, like the best version of yourself. In this moment, you are experiencing the birth of a global phenomenon. For the next several decades, this drink will be the most famous beverage on earth. It will be endorsed by queens, presidents, and even the Vicar of Christ himself. But what you are actually drinking is a chemical cocktail that produces a substance far more potent than cocaine alone. When you mix alcohol with the alkaloids from the coca leaf, your liver creates a new compound called coca-ethylene. It stays in your system longer than cocaine, it produces a more intense euphoria, and it is significantly more toxic to the heart. But in 1863, no one knows this. They only know that Angelo Mariani has captured lightning in a bottle. Mariani was a man who understood the power of the brand long before the term existed. He did not just sell a drink. He sold an endorsement of the elite. You see, Mariani realized early on that if he could get the most respected people in the world to drink his tonic, the masses would follow. He began a massive campaign, sending free cases of his wine to the greatest thinkers, artists, and leaders of the 19th century. And the testimonials came pouring back. Imagine opening a glossy book produced by Mariani, a collection of letters from the most famous people of the age. You flip the pages and see a note from Jules Verne, the father of science fiction. He writes that the wine is so effective that it should be credited with helping him finish his most famous novels. You see a letter from Thomas Edison, the man who lit up the world, claiming that Vin Mariani helps him stay awake through his long nights of invention in the laboratory. You see the names of Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, and H.G. Wells. Even Ulysses S. Grant, the hero of the American Civil War and former president, drank it toward the end of his life to find the strength to finish his memoirs while battling terminal cancer. But the ultimate endorsement, the one that truly solidified Vin Mariani as a holy relic of the high society, came from the Vatican. You see a portrait of Pope Leo XIII. He is an elderly man, frail in appearance but sharp in spirit. He was so enamored with Mariani's tonic that he appeared on posters endorsing it. He even went so far as to award Angelo Mariani a gold medal of recognition from the Vatican. The Pope was known to carry a small hip flask of the wine under his robes to fortify himself during long ceremonies. Think about that for a moment. The head of the Catholic Church was the celebrity face of a cocaine-based beverage. In the eyes of the public, if the Pope could drink it, surely it was a gift from God. As you continue your journey through this era, you start to see the Mariani logo everywhere. It is on the sides of buildings, in the back of every newspaper, and on the vanity tables of the wealthy. The marketing was elegant. One of the most famous advertisements shows a beautiful woman, a Mariani girl, draped in flowing robes, looking rejuvenated and ethereal. The text does not speak of getting high. It speaks of curing melancholia, of restoring the nerves, and of providing a gentle lift to those suffering from the exhaustion of modern life. But while the elites were sipping their fortified wine from crystal glasses, a chemical revolution was happening in the background. Scientists were fascinated by what Mariani had done. They began to realize that the coca leaf was not just a primitive stimulant for South American laborers. It was a pharmaceutical gold mine. The refined powder, cocaine hydrochloride, was becoming easier and cheaper to produce. Mariani's wine contained about 6 milligrams of cocaine per ounce. But soon, others began to push the limits. You walk through the streets of Atlanta, Georgia, in 1885. The air is thick and humid. You see a pharmacist named John Pemberton. He is a veteran of the Civil War, and like many soldiers, he is struggling with a morphine addiction. He has seen the success of Vin Mariani in Europe and decides to create his own version. He calls it Pemberton's French wine coca. It is a direct imitation of Mariani's product, marketed as a medicinal tonic. But when local temperance laws begin to ban alcohol, Pemberton is forced to innovate. He removes the wine and replaces it with a sugary syrup and cola nut extract. He keeps the coca leaves. He calls his new creation Coca-Cola. At this point in history, you are witnessing a world where cocaine is treated with the same casualness we treat caffeine today. It is in the wine of the popes, it is in the soda of the American South, and it is in the throat lozenges given to children. There is no stigma. There is no war on drugs. There is only the promise of endless energy and the cure for all sadness. You might find yourself wondering how a society could be so blind to the addictive nature of the substance. But the truth is, the side effects were being masked by the very thing that made the drug so popular. Because it was integrated into the daily rituals of the upper class, the slow descent into dependence was often dismissed as a nervous breakdown or a lingering case of the vapors. However, the shadows are starting to lengthen. In the grand salons where Vin Mariani is served, you begin to notice a change in the guests. The initial sparkle in their eyes is starting to look like a frantic, wide-eyed stare. The polite conversation is becoming faster, more aggressive, and less coherent. The gentle lift that Mariani promised is requiring more and more wine to achieve. People are starting to realize that the bottle which brought them so much joy also carries a heavy price. By the late 1890s, the tide is turning. Doctors who once praised the wine as a miracle are seeing patients who cannot function without it. Reports of cocaine psychosis are starting to appear in medical journals. The very celebrities who endorse the drink are finding themselves trapped in cycles of stimulation and depression. The world is waking up from its cocaine-infused dream, and the realization is a cold, harsh shock. Angelo Mariani himself remained a respected figure until his death in 1914. He truly believed he was a benefactor to humanity. He never saw himself as a man who helped pave the way for a global crisis. To him, he was an artist of chemistry, a man who had refined the wild energy of the Andes into a sophisticated European pleasure. But as you watch the turn of the century approach, you can see that the era of the innocent tonic is ending. The powder has been unleashed, and it is no longer contained within the elegant glass bottles of a Parisian pharmacy. It has moved from the crystal decanters of popes and kings into the hands of the desperate, and the world is about to find out exactly how much power this little white crystal truly holds. The legacy of Vin Mariani lives on in every branded beverage we drink today, but its darkest contribution was proving that cocaine could be marketed to the masses. It proved that if you wrap a drug in a label of prestige and health, people will not only buy it, they will worship it. As you leave the 19th century behind, you carry with you the memory of that ruby red wine, a drink that once promised to cure the world's ills, but instead left it craving something much more dangerous. You step out of the 19th century and into the biting chill of a new era. The year is 1910, and the air in the American city feels different. It is no longer filled with the innocent wonder of the Victorian age. The gas lamps are being replaced by the harsh, buzzing glow of electric bulbs, and the cobblestones are giving way to the smooth, unforgiving asphalt of the motor car. But there is another change, one you can feel in the way people pull their coats tighter as they pass the local apothecary. The world of legal, over-the-counter miracles is dying. The white powder that once promised to cure your hay fever, your toothache, and your melancholy has become the monster in the closet. You walk toward a newsstand and pick up a paper. The headlines are no longer praising the virtues of Vin Mariani or the invigorating kick of a coca-infused soda. Instead, the ink is thick with stories of madness and mayhem. You read about the cocaine fiend, a phantom created by the sensationalist press to terrify a public already on edge from rapid social change. The language is visceral and designed to provoke a visceral reaction. The papers tell you that the drug has moved from the refined drawing rooms of the wealthy into the back alleys and the tenements. They tell you that it is no longer a tool for the industrious, but a fuel for the criminal. As you look around, you realize that the narrative of cocaine has been hijacked by something much darker than medicine. It has become a weapon of racial and social control. In the American South, the fear is being stoked to a fever pitch. You hear whispers in the streets and read editorials in the papers claiming that cocaine gives certain people superhuman strength and makes them immune to the bullets of the law. It is a lie, a fabrication born of deep-seated prejudices, but it is a lie that is working. You see the police department trade their small-caliber revolvers for heavier weapons, citing the supposed threat of cocaine-crazed individuals. The drug is no longer just a chemical substance. It has been transformed into a symbol of everything the established order fears. You follow the trail of this growing hysteria all the way to Washington, District of Columbia. Here, the atmosphere is heavy with the scent of mahogany and old paper. You find yourself in the halls of power where men in high collars and spectacles are debating the future of your medicine cabinet. One man stands out in the crowd, a physician named Dr. Hamilton Wright. He is often called the father of American narcotic laws, and as you watch him testify, you see a man on a mission. He speaks with a zealot's intensity, describing the United States as the most drug-ridden nation on earth. He does not just want to regulate cocaine. He wants to moralize it. Wright is not alone in his crusade. The world is changing on a global scale. You remember hearing about the International Opium Commission in Shanghai and the subsequent Hague Convention. The nations of the world are coming together, realizing that the uncontrolled flow of narcotics is a problem that crosses borders. But in America, the push for regulation is uniquely aggressive. Dr. Wright and his allies are pushing for a law that will change the relationship between the citizen and the state forever. They want the federal government to have the power to track every grain of cocaine and every drop of morphine from the factory to the bedside. You witness the birth of the Harrison Narcotic Tax Act of 1914. At first glance, the document looks like a simple piece of bureaucratic paper. It does not technically ban the drugs. That would have been seen as an unconstitutional overreach at the time. Instead, it uses the power of the taxman. It requires anyone who produces, imports, manufactures, compounds, deals in, dispenses, or gives away opium or coca leaves to register with the Internal Revenue Service and pay a special tax. You watch as pharmacists and doctors across the country scramble to fill out forms and pay their $1 annual fee. But do not let the low cost fool you. The implications of this act are seismic. You walk into a local pharmacy just days after the act has taken effect. The air of friendly, informal consultation is gone. The pharmacist, once your neighbor and confidant, now looks at you with suspicion. He is terrified of the record keeping. Every sale must be recorded on special forms. Every grain must be accounted for. If he makes a mistake, if he sells a bottle of cocaine-infused throat lozenge to someone without a proper prescription, he faces a massive fine or a prison sentence. The miracle has become a liability. You sit in a doctor's waiting room and listen to the conversations. Doctors are confused and angry. The law says they can still prescribe these drugs in the course of their professional practice only. But what does that mean? Does it mean they can provide maintenance doses to an addict to keep them from getting sick? The government says no. You watch as the Treasury Department begins to interpret the Harrison Act not just as a tax law, but as a total prohibition on treating addiction as a medical condition. Suddenly, the doctor who tries to help a patient manage their craving is no longer a healer. He is a drug trafficker in the eyes of the law. You see the immediate fallout on the streets. For decades, thousands of ordinary people have been using these products. They were the elderly woman with chronic pain, the laborer with a back injury, the housewife trying to cope with the stresses of a large family. They were not criminals. They were customers. But overnight, their supply is cut off. The patent medicines vanish from the shelves. The soda fountains are scrubbed clean of their secret ingredients. You watch the desperation settle into the eyes of those who have become dependent. They are the collateral damage of a moral crusade. As the legal supply dries up, you see the dark shadow of the black market rise to meet the demand. This is the moment the underworld is born. You walk down a darkened wharf and see crates being moved in the dead of night. Since the drug is no longer available at the corner store, its price begins to skyrocket. The profit margins become irresistible to those willing to break the law. You notice that the cocaine is no longer being sold in beautiful glass vials with embossed labels. It is now passed in folded papers, adulterated with God knows what, sold by men who disappear into the fog at the first sign of a blue uniform. The Harrison Act has done something that the Crusaders perhaps did not fully intend. It has moved cocaine from the world of medicine into the world of crime. You see the police force being expanded to deal with this new class of criminal. The Narcotics Division of the Treasury Department is formed, and you watch as these early agents begin their work. They are not like the Old Town constables. They are federal agents, and they are armed with a mandate to purge the nation of its chemical sins. The era of the raid begins. You see doors being kicked in and laboratories being smashed. You stand at the edge of the 1920s and look back. The transition is complete. The miracle powder that was once the pride of the pharmaceutical industry, the substance that was praised by Sigmund Freud and endorsed by popes, is now a contraband. You see the shift in the very soul of the country. The optimism of the late 19th century, the belief that science could solve all human suffering with a simple tincture, has been replaced by a realization of the high cost of that relief. The government has stepped in to save the people from themselves, but in doing so, it has created a new kind of war. You walk through a city park and see a young man shivering on a bench. He is looking for a connection, for a taste of the white powder that the law has moved out of his reach. He is the new face of the problem. He is no longer a patient. He is a deviant. The Harrison Act was supposed to solve the drug problem, but as you look at the rising crime rates and the growing underground economy, you realize it has only changed its shape. The powder has not gone away. It has just gone into the shadows. The transition from a legal miracle to a criminal menace was not just about health. It was about who had the right to control the human mind and body. You feel the weight of this new reality as you walk home. The freedom of the 19th century pharmacy is a ghost. The world is now a place of regulations, taxes, and hidden dangers. The Harrison Act has closed the book on the golden age of cocaine. But as you hear the distant siren of a police car, you know that the story of the powder is far from over. It is merely entering its most violent chapter yet. The sun sets on an America that has traded its tonics for a war. You see the pharmacists locking their heavy iron shutters and the doctors filing their reports with trembling hands. The miracle has been criminalized, but the human desire for that white light has not been extinguished. It has only been driven deeper into the earth, where it will ferment and grow into something the lawmakers in Washington could never have imagined. You take one last look at the empty space on the pharmacy shelf where the cocaine used to sit, and you realize that the world will never be the same again. The age of innocence is dead, and the age of the drug war has begun. You are standing in the shadows of a rain-slicked alleyway in 1924. The air is thick with the smell of wet pavement, coal smoke, and the faint, metallic tang of bootleg gin wafting through the cracks of a nearby basement window. You adjust your coat collar against the chill and knock 3 times on a nondescript wooden door. A small slide opens, a pair of suspicious eyes meet yours, and with a heavy metallic clunk, the door swings inward. You step down into a world of velvet, smoke, and a frantic, driving rhythm that feels like a heartbeat on overdrive. This is the speakeasy. This is the heart of the jazz age. And in the pockets of the men in sharp suits and the tiny beaded bags of the flappers, there is a substance that is quickly becoming the fuel for the most decadent decade in American history. As you walk through the crowded room, you notice something different about the energy here. It is not just the alcohol. Prohibition has turned drinking into a rebellious act, but for many in this underground sanctuary, booze is too slow. It makes you sloppy. It makes you tired. To keep up with the frantic tempo of the Charleston and the wailing improvisations of the saxophone, you need something that sharpens the edges. You see a man at a corner table, his movements quick and bird-like. He leans down for a moment, disappears behind a tall glass of ginger ale, and when he sits back up, his eyes are wide, his nostrils are flared, and he looks like he could outrun a locomotive. This is the secret habit of the underground. This is the white powder that is quietly stitching itself into the fabric of the creative class. By the early 1920s, cocaine has undergone a dramatic transformation in the public consciousness. It has migrated from the pharmacy shelf to the backrooms of the city. While the government has spent the last decade passing laws like the Harrison Act to restrict its sale, all they have really done is drive the market into the hands of those who thrive in the dark. The drug has become expensive, a luxury item for those with money to burn and a desire to live life at a higher frequency. And nowhere is that desire more concentrated than in a sun-drenched patch of land on the other side of the country. You are now leaving the smoky basements of New York and traveling west, across the deserts and the mountains, to the shimmering, newborn hills of Hollywood. In the 1920s, Hollywood is not yet the polished corporate machine we know today. It is a frontier town, a gold rush of celluloid and ego. You walk down Sunset Boulevard and you see a world being built from scratch. The stars of the silent screen are the first true global celebrities, earning salaries that are almost incomprehensible to the average worker. But the work is grueling. To make a film in the early days, you are often working 18-hour shifts under blistering hot lights, performing your own stunts, and living under the constant pressure of a studio system that owns your image and your soul. To survive the pace, the industry turns to what they call joy powder. Imagine you are at one of the legendary parties in the Hollywood Hills. You are surrounded by marble statues, overflowing fountains of champagne, and women in silk gowns that cost more than a suburban house. In the center of the room, on a silver tray, sits a mountain of white dust. It is passed around as casually as hors d'oeuvres. In this era, cocaine is seen by the elite as a sophisticated vice. It is the drug of the thinker, the artist, and the high achiever. It allows the starlets to stay thin and the leading men to stay awake through the midnight shoots. It is the fuel for the dream factory. But as you watch the party continue into the early hours of the morning, you begin to see the cracks in the porcelain. The first major shock to the system comes from the tragic story of Wallace Reed. You might not recognize his name today, but in 1920 he was the most beloved man in America. He was known as the screen's most perfect lover, a handsome, athletic hero who personified clean living and American virtue. But behind the scenes, Reed was a broken man. After a train wreck during a film shoot left him with a painful injury, the studio doctors did what they always did to keep production moving. They pumped him full of morphine and cocaine. Reed became a prisoner to the cycle of up and down, using the white powder to snap himself out of a narcotic haze so he could perform for the cameras. When Wallace Reed died in a sanitarium at the age of 31, the public was horrified. The veil was beginning to slip. You start to hear the whispers in the press about the Hollywood cocaine ring. The newspapers, led by the sensationalist headlines of William Randolph Hearst, begin to paint a picture of a modern Sodom and Gomorrah, where the stars of the screen are corrupting the youth of America with their chemical excesses. The tragedy of Reed is followed by the scandal of Olive Thomas, a beautiful young actress who died in Paris under mysterious circumstances involving drugs, and the infamous trial of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. While Arbuckle's case was primarily about a different kind of tragedy, the media used it to cement the idea that Hollywood was a den of drug-fueled iniquity. Back in the jazz clubs of the East Coast, the atmosphere is also shifting. You see the law enforcement agents, led by figures like the ambitious Harry Anslinger, beginning to target the underground music scene. There is a dark, racial undercurrent to this crusade. The press begins to link the use of cocaine with the rise of jazz music, portraying it as a dangerous influence that breaks down the social barriers between races. You hear the rhetoric in the halls of Congress and in the editorials of the day, claiming that the drug gives its users superhuman strength and a desire to rebel against the established order. The immersive, joyful world of the speakeasy is being recast as a battlefield in a new moral war. As the 1920s roar toward their inevitable conclusion, the pressure on the film industry becomes unbearable. The public is threatening a boycott of movies unless Hollywood cleans up its act. In response, the studio moguls hire a man named Will Hayes to oversee the morality of their productions. This leads to the creation of the Hayes Code, a strict set of rules about what can and cannot be shown on screen. One of the primary targets of the code is the depiction of drug use. You can no longer show a character taking a sniff of powder or even hint at the existence of the underground trade. The drug that built the energy of the silent era is forced even further into the shadows. But as you watch the silent films give way to the talkies, that the habit hasn't truly gone away. It has just become a secret. The powder is still there, tucked into the vanity mirrors of the dressing rooms and the pockets of the directors. It is no longer a public badge of sophistication, but a private burden. The cost is beginning to show. You see the erratic behavior of the stars who can no longer remember their lines. You see the paranoid glances of the musicians who wonder if the man at the bar is a federal agent. The high of the 1920s is beginning to curdle into a long, jagged come-down. The Great Depression arrives like a bucket of ice water to the face. The money that fueled the lavish parties and the expensive habits dries up for many. The jazz underground persists, but the mood has changed. The frantic, cocaine-fueled optimism of the post-war years is replaced by a grittier, harder reality. The drug remains, but it is no longer the star of the show. It becomes the companion of the marginalized, the desperate, and those who still need to believe in a dream that the economy has shattered. You stand on the corner of a street in 1934, watching the lights of a theater flicker. The names on the marquee have changed. The stars of the previous decade have largely vanished, many of them victims of the very lifestyle they pioneered. The era of the joy powder as a Hollywood secret is ending, giving way to a more clandestine and dangerous age of trafficking. The law has become more efficient, the penalties more severe, and the stigma more deeply entrenched. You realize that the powder did more than just corrupt individuals. It changed the way the world looked at art, at race, and at the very nature of pleasure. The underground is still there, and the music is still playing, but the innocence, if there ever was any, is long gone. The white dust has settled, leaving behind a trail of broken dynasties and a blueprint for the wars that are yet to come. The jazz age has ended, not with a bang, but with a frantic, shivering silence. You stand in the shadows of a humid afternoon in Medellin, Colombia. It is the mid-1970s, and the air is thick with more than just the tropical heat. You can smell the heavy, sweet scent of overripe fruit from the street vendors, mixed with the acrid bite of cheap gasoline from the swarms of motorcycles buzzing through the narrow streets of the Aburra Valley. This is a city on the edge of a transformation that the world is not yet prepared for. You walk through the neighborhood of Envigado, where the red brick buildings seem to glow in the fading light. You see a man leaning against a small car. He is short, slightly chubby, and wears a mustache that seems out of place on his youthful face. He looks like a common street hustler, perhaps a man who steals headstones from cemeteries to sand them down and resell them, or a petty car thief. But as you look into his eyes, you see a cold, calculating ambition that feels like a physical weight in the air. This is Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, and you are witnessing the birth of a legend that will soon drench continents in blood and gold. Before Pablo, the cocaine trade was a fragmented, artisanal business. You might have seen small time mules carrying a few kilograms in their luggage on commercial flights, hoping to make enough for a new house or a better life. But Pablo looks at the world differently. He does not see a high-risk, low-yield smuggling route. He sees an industrial opportunity. You watch as he moves from stealing cars to kidnapping for ransom, and finally to the white powder. He realizes that marijuana is too bulky and too cheap. Takes a truckload of weed to make a profit, and trucks are easy to stop. But cocaine? Cocaine is dense. Cocaine is expensive. A suitcase of cocaine is worth more than a warehouse of marijuana. You see him make his first move, a move of calculated brutality and cunning. He pushes aside the established traffickers, like Fabio Restrepo, not with a polite request, but with the cold efficiency of a predator. Once Restrepo is gone, Pablo takes over the operation, and the scale of the trade begins to swell like a rising tide. You follow the money into the jungle, leaving the city behind. The sound of the urban sprawl is replaced by the deafening buzz of cicadas and the distant roar of a hidden airplane engine. You are standing in a clearing where the green canopy has been hacked away to reveal a primitive landing strip. Here, the process becomes industrial. You smell the pungent chemical odors of a coca paste lab. It is a nauseating mix of gasoline, sulfuric acid, and kerosene. This is where the green leaves of the coca plant are transformed into the white crystals that will soon flood the streets of Miami and Los Angeles. You see the workers, their hands stained and their faces weary, stirring massive vats of slurry. This is the source of the river of wealth that is beginning to flow toward Medellin. But Pablo is not alone. You see him meeting with others, men who share his vision of a unified front. You are a silent observer at a ranch where the air is filled with the smell of expensive tobacco and roasted meat. Here are the Ochoa brothers, Jorge, Juan David, and Fabio. They have the social standing and the connections that Pablo lacks. Then there is Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, known as the Mexican, a man with a taste for violence that rivals even the most hardened soldiers. Together, they form what you will come to know as the Medellin cartel. They are no longer just criminals. They are a board of directors for a multinational corporation that happens to sell an illegal product. They realize that by pooling their resources, their planes, and their bribes, they can achieve an economy of scale that no law enforcement agency can hope to stop. You watch as the logistics of the operation shift from the primitive to the sophisticated. Enter Carlos Leder, a man with a wild look in his eyes and a head full of revolutionary ideas. He tells Pablo that they do not need suitcases and mules. They need an island. You travel with them to the Bahamas, to a place called Norman Cay. You feel the sea breeze and see the turquoise water, a paradise that Leder turns into a fortress. He buys up the property, chases away the residents, and builds a massive refrigerated warehouse and an airstrip. Now, the planes do not just fly once a week. They fly constantly. You see the Cessnas and the Pipers touching down, their bellies heavy with hundreds of kilograms of cocaine. They refuel and take off again, leapfrogging into the United States. This is the moment the floodgates open. The supply of cocaine into America increases by 1,000%, and the price begins to drop even as the profits reach astronomical levels. Back in Medellin, you see the physical manifestation of this wealth. It is surreal and grotesque. You are invited, in your imagination, to the gates of Hacienda Napoles. This is Pablo's private kingdom, a sprawling estate that covers thousands of acres. You pass under a gate topped with the actual light plane that carried his first shipment of cocaine to the United States. Inside, you see a private zoo. You hear the trumpeting of elephants and the low growl of lions imported from Africa. You watch hippos splashing in man-made lakes. There are life-sized statues of dinosaurs and a collection of vintage cars. The wealth is so vast that it ceases to have meaning. You hear the stories of how the cartel spends $2,500 a month just on rubber bands to hold their stacks of cash together. You see the warehouses where pallets of United States currency are stacked to the ceiling. So much of it that 10% is lost every year because rats chew on the bills or they rot in the damp Colombian air. But you also see the darker side of this ascent. You feel the chill in the air when Pablo utters his famous ultimatum. Plata o plomo, silver or lead. You walk into a courtroom where a judge is presiding over a case against the cartel. You see the look on the judge's face as he is offered a choice. He can take a briefcase full of cash, more money than he would earn in 10 lifetimes, or he can take a bullet to the head. You see the police officers, the politicians, and the journalists who are faced with the same choice. The state is being hollowed out from within. You witness the corruption of an entire society, where the line between the law and the outlaw becomes a blur. Pablo is no longer just a drug dealer. He is a shadow government. You see him try to legitimize this power. You walk with him into the slums of Medellin, the places the government has forgotten. He is building houses, soccer fields, and schools. You hear the people cheering for him, calling him the Robin Hood of the North. He hands out $100 bills to the poor, and for a moment you can see why they love him. He provides the dignity that the state denied them. He uses this popular support as a shield and a weapon. You watch as he runs for political office, actually winning a seat as an alternative representative in the Colombian Congress. He wants to be the president. He wants the ultimate legitimacy. You see him sitting in the halls of power, a man who has conquered the world of crime now trying to conquer the world of law. But the facade cannot last forever. You feel the tension building as the Colombian elite and the United States government begin to realize the scale of the threat. The ascent of Pablo Escobar has changed the world. Cocaine is no longer a luxury for the elite in jazz clubs. It is a global commodity, a source of unimaginable wealth, and a catalyst for unprecedented violence. You stand on the balcony of a high-rise in Medellin, looking out over the city as the sun sets. The lights are flickering on, but the air feels heavy with the coming storm. The king of cocaine has built his throne on a mountain of white powder, but that mountain is soaked in blood. The era of the cartels has truly begun, and the world will never be the same. You realize that you have watched a man transform from a petty thief into a force of nature, a man who dared to challenge the very concept of the nation-state. As the segment ends, you see the shadow of Pablo Escobar stretching across the entire map of the Americas, a shadow that is only beginning to grow. You step off a plane at Miami International Airport in the late summer of 1978. The humidity hits you like a wet wool blanket, thick and smelling of jet fuel and salt spray. You are surrounded by a sea of pastel leisure suits, gold chains, and the frantic energy of a city that feels like it is vibrating on a frequency you cannot quite hear yet. To the rest of the world, Miami is a sleepy retirement community, a place where grandparents go to sit on porches and watch the tide come in. But as you walk through the terminal, you notice something strange. People are not carrying suitcases. They are carrying gym bags and briefcases that they clutch to their chests with a white-knuckled intensity. You see men in silk shirts making frantic calls on payphones, their eyes darting toward the exits. You do not know it yet, but you have just arrived at the ground zero of a transformation that will redefine the American dream into a neon nightmare. Welcome to the era of the cocaine cowboys. For most of the 1970s, the drug of choice in South Florida was marijuana. It was bulky, it smelled, and it required massive freighter ships and slow-moving shrimp boats to move it from the Caribbean. But as you look toward the horizon, the math is changing. You realize that a single suitcase filled with white powder is worth more than an entire ship full of weed. It is easier to hide, easier to move, and the profit margins are astronomical. The shadow you saw stretching across the Americas is no longer just a map on a wall. It is here. It is in the water. It is in the banks. And it is beginning to stain the white sands of South Beach red. You find yourself sitting at a bar on Ocean Drive. The sun is setting, painting the sky in streaks of violet and hot pink. Suddenly, the peace is shattered by the high-pitched whine of a high-performance engine. A cigarette boat screams past the shoreline, its hull cutting through the Atlantic like a razor blade. These are the blockade runners of the modern age. You watch as the Coast Guard tries to keep up, but their cutters are sluggish and old. The smugglers are driving machines built with unlimited cash, capable of outrunning anything the government can put in the water. This is the new reality. The sheer volume of wealth pouring into the city is so great that it is actually distorting the local economy. You walk past a car dealership and see a 20-year-old man in flip-flops paying for a brand new Porsche with a brown paper bag full of $20 bills. The salesman does not even blink. He just counts the cash and hands over the keys. But with this mountain of money comes a level of violence that the United States has never seen before. You are no longer in the Miami of postcards. You are in a war zone. To understand how it got this way, you have to look at the people who are pulling the strings. You hear the name whispered in the shadows of the nightclubs. The Godmother. Her name is Griselda Blanco. She is a diminutive woman with a cold stare that can freeze the blood in your veins. She does not play by the old rules of the mafia. She does not care about honor or tradition. She cares about territory and terror. You hear stories about how she pioneered the motorcycle hit, where two men on a bike pull up to a car in traffic, the passenger empties a submachine gun into the target, and they vanish into the gridlock before the first shell casing hits the pavement. The turning point, the moment the world finally realizes that Miami has fallen, happens on a bright afternoon on July 11th, 1979. You are at the Dadeland Mall, a temple of suburban consumerism. Families are shopping for school clothes and eating ice cream. Suddenly, a white delivery van with the words Crown Liquors painted on the side pulls up in front of a liquor store. Two men step out, but they are not carrying boxes of wine. They are carrying high-capacity submachine guns. You hear the rhythmic thud of gunfire echoing off the concrete walls. This is not a precision strike. It is a massacre. The interior of the store is shredded. Bottles of expensive scotch shatter, mixing with the blood of the victims on the floor. When the police arrive, they find the van abandoned. Inside, it is lined with steel plates. It is a war wagon, a mobile fortress designed for urban combat. The Dadeland Mall shooting is a signal fire. It tells the world that the cocaine cowboys are not hiding in the shadows anymore. They own the streets. As the months roll into the early 1980s, the body count begins to climb at a terrifying rate. You walk past the Miami-Dade County morgue and see a line of refrigerated trucks parked outside. The building is full. There are so many bodies coming in from the drug wars that the medical examiners have nowhere to put them. They have to rent meat lockers just to keep up with the pace of the killing. You see the headlines every morning. A body found floating in the Everglades. A man executed in a parking lot in broad daylight. A car bomb exploding on a quiet residential street. The violence is so unpredictable and so savage that it begins to tear at the social fabric of the city. Yet, in the midst of this carnage, the city is booming. You look up and see the skyline changing almost overnight. Massive glass towers are rising from the swamp, funded by money that is being laundered through 1,000 different shell companies. The banks are overflowing with cash. In fact, the Federal Reserve Branch in Miami has a cash surplus of billions of dollars. There is so much physical currency in the city that the banks have to hire extra staff just to count the mountains of small bills. You see the influence of the powder everywhere. It is in the architecture, the fashion, and the frantic, drug-fueled nightlife of the Mutiny Hotel, where dealers and celebrities rub shoulders under the watchful eyes of undercover agents and hired assassins. You start to realize that the law enforcement agencies are completely outgunned. The local police are driving standard patrol cars while the smugglers are using sophisticated radar, encrypted radios, and night vision goggles. For a long time, it feels like the government has simply given up. But then, the pressure reaches a breaking point. You see the arrival of the Central Tactical Unit known as CENTAC. These are the hunters. They begin to realize that they cannot fight this war with traditional methods. They have to follow the money. They start to map the connections between the street-level shooters in Miami and the kingpins in Medellin. You spend an evening in a dark room with a veteran detective. He looks tired. His eyes are bloodshot, and he has a stack of crime scene photos that never seems to end. He tells you about Rivi Ayala, one of Griselda Blanco's top enforcers. Rivi is charismatic, handsome, and utterly soulless. He is a man who can kill a person in a crowded room and then go out for a steak dinner like nothing happened. The detective tells you that the hardest part is not catching the killers. It is finding witnesses who are brave enough to testify. In the era of the cocaine cowboys, a witness is just a victim who has not been found yet. As you navigate this neon wilderness, you see the paradox of the era. The cocaine trade is destroying families and turning neighborhoods into battlefields. But it is also the engine that is turning Miami into a world-class city. Without the cocaine money, the luxury hotels and the glittering condos would not exist. The city is being built on a foundation of white powder and blood. You see the tension in the faces of the citizens. They love the prosperity, but they are terrified of the price. By the time the mid-1980s arrive, the federal government finally flexes its muscles. You see the creation of the South Florida Task Force, headed by Vice President George Bush. The military starts to get involved. Black Hawk helicopters hover over the coastline, and AWACS surveillance planes circle the skies. The noose is starting to tighten, but the era has already left its mark. The cocaine cowboys have changed the DNA of the American underworld. They proved that with enough money and enough firepower, you can challenge the state itself. You stand on the beach one last time as the era begins to shift. The wild, lawless days of the late 70s are giving way to something more organized, something even more corporate and dangerous. The snowstorm in Miami has been blinding, a whiteout of greed and violence that transformed a sleepy town into the murder capital of the world. You look at the glittering lights of the city and realize that while the shootings at the mall might stop, the powder has already seeped into the very soil. The cowboys might be going to prison or to the grave, but the empire they built is standing tall, a monument to the decade where cocaine became the king of the South. You step out of the humid heat of the Valle del Cauca and into the cool, filtered air of a glass office tower. The roar of the Colombian streets fades away, replaced by the soft, rhythmic hum of a central air conditioning system. This is not the wild, explosive world of the Medellin cowboys you have seen before. This is Cali. If Medellin was the rough and tumble frontier, then Cali is the corporate headquarters. You are not surrounded by men in camouflage carrying gold-plated machine guns. Instead, you are surrounded by men in tailored Italian suits, men who look like they belong on the cover of a high-end business magazine. They speak in soft, measured tones about profit margins, logistical bottlenecks, and strategic partnerships. But do not let the silk ties and the expensive cologne fool you. You are standing in the heart of the most sophisticated criminal enterprise the world has ever seen. This is the Cali Corporation. In the mid-1980s, while Pablo Escobar is busy declaring war on the state and painting the streets of Medellin red, the leaders of the Cali cartel are doing something much more dangerous. They are becoming invisible. You walk down the hall and see the brothers who run this empire. Gilberto Rodriguez Orihuela, often called the chess player, sits at a massive mahogany desk. He does not look like a bandit. He looks like a banker. Beside him is his brother Miguel, the logistical mastermind who keeps the gears of the machine turning. They do not want to destroy the government. They want to own it. They do not want to be folk heroes like Pablo. They want to be legitimate businessmen who just happen to deal in the most profitable commodity on earth. You look at the charts on the wall. This is a vertical integration model that would make a Fortune 500 chief executive officer weep with envy. They have their own banks to wash the cash. They have a massive chain of pharmacies called Drogas La Rabaja, which serves as a perfect front for distributing chemicals and moving money. They have a professional soccer team, America de Cali, to project power and prestige. They have even built an intelligence network that rivals the national police. In fact, they call their security apparatus the Cali KGB. You realize that in this city, the cartel is not just a part of the economy. The cartel is the economy. The way they operate is chillingly efficient. Think about the way a traditional business works. You have departments for shipping, for marketing, for legal, and for accounting. The Cali cartel mirrors this perfectly. They pioneered the use of shipping containers to move multi-ton loads of cocaine. While the Medellin groups were still trying to fly small planes into the Florida Everglades, the Cali brothers were hiding white powder inside loads of frozen broccoli, hollowed-out lumber, and even inside the tiles of bathroom floors. They understood that the volume of international trade was so massive that the authorities could only inspect a tiny fraction of what came across the border. They were not just drug dealers. They were global logistics experts. You follow the money trail from the office to the streets of New York City. This is where the Cali cartel truly separated itself from the competition. While the Miami drug wars of the early 80s were loud and bloody, the Cali presence in New York was a whisper. They organized their American operations into cells. You might be a driver for a Cali cell in Queens, but you will never know the person who rents the stash house in Brooklyn. You will never meet the money launderer in Manhattan. Each cell is a silo. If you get caught, you can only give up a tiny piece of the puzzle. The brothers back in Colombia are insulated by layers and layers of middle management and deniability. It is a corporate structure designed to withstand the pressure of law enforcement. Imagine you are a New York City detective trying to crack this nut. You pick up a street dealer, but he knows nothing. You find a stash house, but the lease is in the name of a dead person. You follow a money trail, and it leads you to a legitimate bank in Panama owned by a shell company in the Cayman Islands. You are chasing ghosts. This was the genius of the Cali Corporation. They understood that violence brings heat, and heat is bad for business. While Pablo Escobar was blowing up airliners and assassinating ministers, the Cali leaders were making quiet donations to political campaigns. They were buying the silence of judges and the loyalty of generals with a checkbook rather than a bullet. They called it the way of the gentleman. But do not mistake this gentlemanly veneer for a lack of ruthlessness. You see the darker side of the operation when you look at how they handle their internal security. If you steal from the Cali cartel, you do not just die. Your entire family tree might be erased. They believe in total control. They have thousands of taxi drivers and street vendors on their payroll, acting as eyes and ears. Every phone call made in the city of Cali is intercepted by their technicians. You are walking through a city where the walls literally have ears. They know who is talking to the police. They know who is thinking about flipping, and they act with surgical precision. Then there is the fourth member of the leadership, a man named Helmer Pacho Herrera. You see him in a different light. He is the master of the New York market and the man who manages the distribution networks across the United States. He is flamboyant, dangerous, and incredibly smart. While the Rodriguez-Orihuela brothers focus on the big picture and the political influence, Pacho is the one who ensures the product hits the streets and the cash flows back south. He is the bridge between the boardroom and the pavement. As the 1980s turn into the 1990s, the balance of power shifts. You can feel the tension in the air. The Medellin cartel is under heavy fire from the Colombian government and the United States. Pablo Escobar is on the run, hiding in holes in the ground and burning millions of dollars just to stay warm. But here in Cali, business is booming. With their rivals distracted and dying, the Cali Corporation moves in to take over the market share. They are not just the biggest players in Colombia anymore. They are the biggest cocaine suppliers on the planet. They are responsible for 80% of the cocaine entering the United States. They are making billions of dollars every single month. You stand in their counting house and watch the sheer volume of paper. They do not count the money anymore. They weigh it. They have so much cash that they have run out of places to hide it. It is buried in the walls of houses. It is stashed in warehouses. It is being funneled into legitimate businesses at such a rate that it is distorting the entire Colombian economy. The gentlemen of Cali have achieved the impossible. They have built a criminal empire that looks and acts like a sovereign state. You realize that this is the peak of the cocaine era. The powder has moved from the fringes of society into the very bedrock of global finance. It has corrupted dynasties and bought entire governments. The Cali Corporation is the ultimate expression of this corruption. They proved that if you are smart enough, quiet enough, and rich enough, you can operate right in the open. They are the hidden hand behind the world's most lucrative and deadly trade. You walk back out into the bright Cali sun, the cool air of the office still clinging to your clothes. The city looks beautiful, prosperous, and peaceful. But now you know the truth. You have seen the boardroom. You have seen the charts and the ledgers. You have seen the chess player at work. The war for the soul of Colombia is not just being fought with bombs in Medellin. It is being won with pens and handshakes here in Cali. The corporate narcos have arrived, and for a few years they will truly be the kings of the world. But as you look at the towering skyline, you wonder how long such an empire can truly last before the weight of its own greed brings it all crashing down. For now, however, the boardroom is quiet, the profits are record-breaking, and the gentlemen of Cali are in absolute control. You are standing on a street corner in south-central Los Angeles, or perhaps it is the Bronx or North Miami. It is the summer of 1985. The air is heavy, thick with the smell of hot asphalt and the distant, rhythmic thumping of a bass line from a passing car. For years, you have heard about cocaine as something for the elite. You have seen the glossy images of celebrities with gold spoons and the stories of Wall Street traders fueled by expensive white powder. But something has changed. The luxury has been stripped away. The gold spoons are gone, replaced by glass pipes and plastic lighters. You are witnessing the birth of an era that will redefine the American landscape. This is the crack epidemic, and it is about to tear the social fabric of the country apart. To understand how we got here, you have to look at the chemistry. While the gentlemen in Cali were busy refining their shipping routes and moving tons of powder, a new realization was taking hold on the streets. Powder cocaine is expensive. It is hard to transport in small quantities without losing value, and it requires a certain level of affluence to maintain the habit. But then, someone discovers a loophole in the chemistry. By taking that high-quality powder and mixing it with simple household baking soda and water, then heating it over a flame, the cocaine undergoes a transformation. It precipitates out of the solution into solid, yellowish-white chunks. These are rocks. When they dry, they are hard. When they are heated, they do not burn away like powder. They vaporize. And as they do, they make a distinct, rhythmic popping sound. That sound is where the name comes from. Crack. You watch as this new product hits the pavement. It is a masterpiece of dark marketing. Instead of selling a gram of powder for $100, a dealer can now sell a single rock in a tiny plastic vial for $5 or $10. This is the democratization of the drug. Suddenly, the high that was reserved for the penthouse is available to the person living in the housing project. It is accessible to the teenager on the corner and the worker living paycheck to paycheck. But there is a catch, and it is a devastating one. When you snort powder cocaine, the high comes on gradually and lasts for maybe 30 minutes. When you smoke crack, the reaction is nearly instantaneous. The vapor enters your lungs, hits your bloodstream, and reaches your brain in less than 10 seconds. It is an explosion of dopamine that is more intense than almost any other experience on Earth. You feel invincible. You feel a surge of euphoria that defies description. But that feeling is fleeting. Within 5 to 10 minutes, the high vanishes as quickly as it arrived. It leaves you in a valley of deep depression and intense craving. The only way back to the peak is another hit. This creates a cycle of use that is far more aggressive and compulsive than powder cocaine ever was. You are not just using a drug anymore. You are chasing a ghost that disappears the moment you touch it. You walk further into the neighborhood and you see the physical transformation of the city. Houses that once held families are now boarded up, but the front doors are constantly swinging open and shut. These are crack houses. Inside, the atmosphere is desperate. There is no furniture, just the flickering light of lighters and the pervasive, chemical smell of burning plastic. You see people who have not slept in days. Their eyes are wide and darting. Their bodies are thinning out as the drug suppresses their appetite for food, replacing it with an appetite for only one thing. The community that once felt like a safety net is fraying. Grandparents are suddenly raising their grandchildren because the parents have vanished into the haze of the pipe. The economic impact is just as visible. Because the drug is so cheap to buy but so addictive, the demand is astronomical. This creates a gold rush on the street level. You see young men who feel they have no other options in a crumbling economy looking at the corner as a way out. They are the foot soldiers of a new kind of army. The traditional hierarchy of the mob is being replaced by street gangs like the Crips and the Bloods. They realize that controlling a single block in a high-demand neighborhood can bring in thousands of dollars a day. But with that kind of money comes incredible violence. You hear the sound of gunfire in the distance. It is not the sporadic violence of the past. It is systematic. It is the sound of turf wars. The Uzi and the Mac-10 become the tools of the trade. You see the sidewalk memorials of candles and flowers for kids who were caught in the crossfire. The murder rates in cities like Washington District of Columbia, Chicago, and Detroit begin to shatter records. The police are overwhelmed, and their response is to turn the streets into a war zone. You watch as the police departments shift their tactics. They are no longer just patrolling. They are invading. You see the rise of the special weapons and tactics teams and the use of armored vehicles. In Los Angeles, you see the battering ram, a massive metal pole attached to a vehicle used to smash through the walls of suspected crack houses. The strategy is called heavy metal, and it treats American neighborhoods like occupied territory. The police are under immense pressure from a terrified public to do something, anything, to stop the tide. But the tactics often alienate the very people they are supposed to protect, creating a deep well of resentment and distrust between the community and the law. The fear spreads from the streets to the television screens in every living room in America. You see the news reports about crack babies, infants born addicted to the drug who are supposedly destined for a life of cognitive failure and violence. While later medical research would show many of these claims were exaggerated or misunderstood the effects of poverty and neglect, at the time, the image of the crack baby becomes a powerful symbol of a decaying society. It fuels a moral panic that reaches the highest levels of government. You find yourself in the halls of Congress in 1986. The death of Len Bias, a superstar basketball player who died from a cocaine overdose just 2 days after being drafted by the Boston Celtics, has sent the country into a frenzy. It does not matter that Bias used powder cocaine. In the public mind, cocaine is now synonymous with the chaos of the crack epidemic. Politicians from both parties scramble to see who can be tougher on crime. The result is the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986. You watch as the ink dries on a law that creates a massive disparity in sentencing. Under this law, it takes 500 grams of powder cocaine to trigger a 5-year mandatory minimum prison sentence. But it only takes 5 grams of crack to trigger that same 5-year sentence. This is the 100-to-1 ratio. Since crack is more prevalent in impoverished, minority neighborhoods and powder is more common in wealthier, white areas, the law effectively targets a specific demographic. You see the prison populations begin to explode. A generation of young men is removed from their communities and funneled into the correctional system. The war on drugs has become a war on the city. The tragedy of the crack years is that the drug did not just destroy individuals. It destroyed the structures that held those individuals together. You see the loss of fathers, the strain on the foster care system, and the permanent scarring of urban economies. The money that flowed from the cartel boardrooms in Cali ended up here, in the form of vials and violence. The gentlemen in Colombia got their billions, but the price was paid in American streets. As the 80s turn into the 90s, the peak of the epidemic begins to subside, not because the drug has disappeared, but because the devastation has become so complete that the next generation sees the wreckage and recoils. You see the survivors trying to rebuild. They are walking past the same corners where the violence once reigned, looking at the empty lots where houses used to stand. The crack years were more than just a period of drug use. They were a domestic social catastrophe that changed the face of the American city forever. The powder had truly corrupted everything it touched, from the highest office to the humblest street corner. You look around at the quiet that has finally returned to some of these neighborhoods, but you know that beneath the surface, the scars are deep, and the history of this powder is still being written in the lives of those who lived through it. By the time the sun sets over the skyline, you realize that the story of cocaine is no longer just about smugglers and kingpins. It is a story about the people who were left behind when the smoke cleared. It is a story of a country that tried to arrest its way out of a public health crisis and ended up with a legacy of mass incarceration and broken homes. The high was fast, the crash was brutal, and the recovery would take decades. You feel the weight of this history as you walk away from the corner, knowing that while the headlines have faded, the impact of these years remains etched into the concrete of every major city in the United States. You are standing on the deck of a United States Coast Guard cutter, somewhere in the vast, ink-black expanse of the Caribbean Sea. The air is thick with salt and humidity, a heavy blanket that weighs on your shoulders as you stare into the void. It is 3 o'clock in the morning. The only sound is the rhythmic, low-frequency thrum of the engines beneath your feet and the occasional crackle of a radio inside the bridge. You are part of a multi-billion-dollar wall, a thin line of steel and technology designed to stop a flood of white powder that shows no sign of receding. This is the front line of interdiction, a word that sounds clinical on paper but feels like a never-ending game of cat and mouse in the real world. You look through a pair of night vision goggles, and the world turns a grainy electric green. Far off on the horizon, you see it, a tiny white wake cutting through the waves. It is a go-fast boat, powered by 4 massive outboard engines, carrying 2 tons of high-purity cocaine. In this moment, you are seeing the physical manifestation of a policy that has defined American foreign and domestic life for decades. This is the war on drugs in its most literal form. It is an era of high-tech surveillance, military-grade hardware, and a budget that has grown from millions to billions and eventually to an estimated $1 trillion spent over the course of 50 years. You step back into the bridge, where the glow of radar screens illuminates the faces of young men and women. They are tracking the boat, coordinating with a customs and border protection aircraft circling thousands of feet above, invisible to the smugglers below. This level of coordination was the hallmark of the 1980s, when the United States government decided that the only way to stop the cocaine epidemic was to cut off the supply at the source and choke the transit routes. You are witnessing the legacy of the South Florida Task Force, a massive mobilization of federal resources headed by Vice President George H.W. Bush in 1982. It was a moment when the federal government acknowledged that local police were completely outgunned by the cartels. The strategy was simple in theory. If you could seize enough of the product before it hit the streets, you could drive the price up so high that it would become unaffordable for the average user. You would break the back of the cartels by making their business model too risky. But as you watch that green light on the radar screen, you realize the fundamental flaw in the plan. The profit margins are so astronomical that the cartels can afford to lose 9 out of every 10 shipments and still make more money than most Fortune 500 companies. To them, the boat you are chasing is not a catastrophe. It is just the cost of doing business. As your cutter accelerates, the roar of the engines drowning out the wind, you think about how this conflict has escalated. It started with simple patrol boats and dogs at the border. Now it involves Black Hawk helicopters, AWACS surveillance planes, and deep-sea sensors. You are part of a military machine. The line between law enforcement and warfare has blurred until it is almost non-existent. You are not just looking for a criminal. You are engaging in a tactical operation against a paramilitary organization. The smugglers on that boat know you are coming. They have their own technology. They have satellite phones, encrypted radios, and sometimes even their own scout planes. If you get too close, they will start dumping the bales of cocaine overboard. You can imagine them, frantic in the dark, tossing millions of dollars into the sea to destroy the evidence. These are the white ghosts of the Caribbean, bales of cocaine wrapped in waterproof plastic that sometimes wash up on the shores of Florida or the Bahamas, turning a lucky beachcomber into a millionaire or a corpse. But interdiction is not just about the sea. You shift your perspective, traveling from the spray of the ocean to the heat of the Mexican desert. You are now standing on a dusty ridge overlooking a stretch of the border near El Paso. The sun is a white-hot disk in the sky, and the air smells of baked earth and diesel exhaust. Below you, the border fence snakes across the landscape like a rusted scar. This became the new front line when the Caribbean routes you were just patrolling became too difficult for the cartels. This is what experts call the balloon effect. You squeeze the air out of one part of a balloon, and it simply bulges out in another. By successfully patrolling the waters of Florida, the United States government inadvertently handed the keys of the cocaine kingdom to the Mexican cartels. You watch a line of semi-trucks idling at the port of entry. There are thousands of them, a river of commerce that is the lifeblood of the North American economy. Hidden inside those trucks, tucked into secret compartments in the floor, or dissolved into the liquid of industrial cleaners, or molded into the very plastic of the crates, is the cocaine. You realize the scale of the challenge. How do you find a few hundred kilos of powder hidden inside 20 tons of legitimate cargo? The border agents are using X-ray machines the size of houses and dogs that can smell a single gram of powder through a steel wall, yet the flow continues. You think about the ingenuity born of desperation and greed. You have seen photos of the narco subs, those crude, low-profile vessels built in the murky jungles of Colombia. They are not true submarines, but they sit so low in the water that they are almost invisible to radar. They are built by hand, often by people who have never seen the ocean, powered by truck engines and manned by crews who must endure weeks of breathing diesel fumes in a cramped, dark space. Some of these vessels can carry 7 or 8 tons of cocaine. If they are caught, the crew pulls a lever to scuttle the ship, sending the evidence and sometimes themselves to the bottom of the ocean. The fact that the cartels would build a disposable submarine for a single trip tells you everything you need to know about the economics of this war. You consider the cost of this trillion-dollar effort. It is not just the money spent on boats, planes, and sensors. It is the cost of a domestic prison system that has exploded in size. You think about the mandatory minimum sentences and the millions of lives shaped by the legal fallout of this interdiction effort. You see the shadow of the war on drugs in the ruined neighborhoods of American cities and the ghost towns of the rural South. You realize that for every kilo seized at the border, the price on the street might rise a few dollars, but the demand remains a constant, hungry force that pulls the drugs across the line no matter how high the wall is built. As you stand back on that Coast Guard cutter, the chase reaching its climax, you see the smuggler's boat finally slow down. The blue and red lights of a boarding vessel illuminate the scene. It is a victory. Another few tons of poison will never reach its destination. But as the sun begins to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, you know that somewhere else, perhaps only 20 miles away, another boat is slipping through. Somewhere in the desert, a tunnel is being dug. Somewhere in a warehouse, a shipment is being prepared. You feel the exhaustion of a conflict that has no clear end point. The war on drugs has become a permanent state of being, an endless cycle of escalation and adaptation. You are a witness to a struggle where the enemy is not a single person or a single nation, but a global market that values a white powder more than the lives of those who transport it or those who try to stop it. The sea looks calm now, but you know that beneath the surface, the current of the drug trade is as strong and as relentless as ever. You look at the horizon, realizing that while the battles are fought with steel and gunpowder, The war itself is fought in the human heart, driven by a demand that no amount of interdiction has ever been able to truly quench. You watch the captured boat being towed back toward land, a small trophy in a trillion-dollar war that has rewritten the history of the modern world. The sea spray of the Caribbean is behind you now. You leave the humid air of Miami and the turquoise waters of the Florida Keys, turning your gaze westward across the Gulf of Mexico. You are standing in the high, dry heat of the Sierra Madre Occidental. The air here smells of dust, pine, and diesel. The sounds of the ocean have been replaced by the low hum of a light aircraft engine somewhere in the distance and the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel. You are witnessing a tectonic shift in the underworld. The map of the cocaine trade is being redrawn, and the center of gravity is moving from the islands of the Atlantic to the dusty highways of the Mexican border. For decades, the mountains of Sinaloa and the border towns of Chihuahua were known for two things. They were the source of high-quality marijuana and the origin of the brown heroin that fed the habits of thousands in the United States. The men who ran these routes were smugglers by birthright. They knew every canyon, every dry riverbed, and every corrupt official from Culiacan to El Paso. But they were seen as secondary players in the global drug trade. They were the country cousins to the sophisticated, high-rolling lords of Medellin and Cali. While the Colombians were flying jumbo jets full of white powder into secret Florida airstrips, the Mexicans were mostly moving bulky bales of weed across the Rio Grande in the back of old pickup trucks. But the world you just left behind, the world of the South Florida Task Force and the massive naval blockades in the Caribbean, has changed everything. The Colombians are desperate. Their routes through the Bahamas are being choked off. Their planes are being intercepted by radar and their boats are being seized by the Coast Guard. They need a new way in. They need a back door. You imagine yourself sitting in a dimly lit office in a Guadalajara mansion in the mid-1980s. Across from you sits a man who looks more like a high-level bank executive or a politician than a bandit. His name is Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. He is tall, thin, and composed. They call him El Padrino, the Godfather. He is a former state police officer who has done something no one else thought possible. He has taken the disparate, warring families of the Mexican smuggling world and forged them into a single corporate entity. He calls it the Federation. Felix Gallardo is a visionary of the dark arts of logistics. He understands that the real power in the drug trade is not in the production, but in the transportation. He sees the Colombians struggling and he sees an opportunity to change the nature of his country forever. When the representatives of the Cali cartel come to him, they are looking for a simple service. They want him to use his established marijuana routes to move their cocaine. They offer him cash, millions of dollars for every ton he can successfully slip across the border. But Felix Gallardo is smarter than that. He knows that cash is fleeting and that the Colombians can always find someone else to pay if the price gets too high. He makes a counterproposal that will set the stage for decades of bloodshed and unimaginable wealth. He tells the Colombians that he does not want their cash. He wants a piece of the product. He demands a 50% cut of every shipment. You move a ton for us, you keep half a ton for yourself. This is the birth of the Mexican cocaine trade as we know it today. In an instant, the Mexicans stop being simple transporters. They become owners. They become distributors. They now have their own skin in the game and their own incentive to build a retail network across the United States. This arrangement is often called the trampoline. The cocaine bounces from Colombia to the hidden airstrips of Mexico, and then it is vaulted over the border into the hungry markets of Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. You walk through the streets of Guadalajara during this era and you can feel the transformation. The city is booming. New hotels are rising. Luxury car dealerships are appearing on dusty corners. The Federation has divided Mexico into plazas. Each high-ranking member of the Federation is given a specific territory or a specific border crossing. You have the Arellano Felix brothers in Tijuana, controlling the gateway to California. You have Amado Carrillo Fuentes in Juarez, a man who will eventually be known as the Lord of the Skies for his fleet of Boeing 727s used to move cocaine. And you have a short, stocky man from the mountains named Joaquin Guzman Lora, who the world will one day know as El Chapo. Under the Federation, the business is orderly. There are rules. There are meetings. Felix Gallardo keeps the peace, ensuring that everyone gets their cut and that the violence stays directed away from the public eye. The Mexican government, from the local police to the highest levels of the federal administration, is largely bought and paid for. You see the federal police guarding the warehouses where the white powder is stored. You see the military trucks turning a blind eye to the convoys moving north. It is a golden age for the smugglers. But there is a fly in the ointment. You notice a man who does not fit in. He is an American, an undercover agent for the Drug Enforcement Administration named Enrique Kiki Camarena. He is operating out of the American consulate in Guadalajara, and he is seeing things he is not supposed to see. He is tracking the massive marijuana plantations that fund the Federation's expansion into cocaine. He is documenting the links between the traffickers and the Mexican political elite. In 1984, acting on information from Camarena, the Mexican military raids a massive plantation known as Rancho Buffalo. You see the images of thousands of tons of burning marijuana, a loss of hundreds of millions of dollars for the Federation. The peace is broken. The traffickers are no longer just businessmen. They are angry, and they feel betrayed by the system they thought they controlled. In February 1985, you witness the moment the world changes. Kiki Camarena is kidnapped in broad daylight on the streets of Guadalajara. He is taken to a house owned by one of the Federation's top lieutenants and tortured for days. The traffickers want to know how much the Americans know. They want to know who is talking. When Camarena's body is eventually found, the reaction from the United States is a cold, fury-filled wave. The border is effectively shut down. Operation Leyenda is launched, a massive investigation that puts immense pressure on the Mexican government to hand over their protected allies. You watch as the Federation begins to buckle under the weight of this international scrutiny. Felix Gallardo is forced into hiding. He continues to run the empire from the shadows for a few years, but the walls are closing in. In 1989, he is finally arrested. But even from a prison cell, he attempts one final act of management. He calls a meeting of his top lieutenants. He knows he can no longer rule as a single king. He decides to formalize the plaza system, officially carving up the country among his successors. He gives the Tijuana route to the Arellano Felix family. He gives the Juarez route to Carrillo Fuentes. And he gives the Sinaloa territory to a group that includes the young El Chapo. He thinks he is preserving the peace. In reality, he is drawing the battle lines for a civil war that will consume Mexico for the next 30 years. As you stand on the border now, watching the sun set over the desert, you realize the magnitude of what has happened. The cocaine trade has matured. It is no longer a wild, disorganized rush. It is an industry with its own geography, its own corporate structure, and its own sovereign power. The Mexican cartels have realized that they are the gatekeepers to the largest drug market on earth. They no longer work for the Colombians. They are slowly but surely becoming their superiors. The powder that corrupted the dynasties of South America has found a new home. It has moved from the jungle to the desert, and in doing so, it has become even more dangerous. The Federation is gone, replaced by warring factions that will use the unimaginable profits of cocaine to build private armies. You see the first signs of the violence to come, the first cracks in the desert floor that will soon become canyons of blood. The shift is complete. The border is no longer just a line on a map. It is the most valuable piece of real estate in the global underworld, and the fight to control it has only just begun. You look toward the horizon, where the lights of an American city twinkle in the distance, so close and yet so far from the chaos that brings the white powder to its door. The rise of the Federation was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the powder would not just corrupt individuals, but would begin to challenge the very foundations of nation-states. You stand at the edge of a tidal river deep within the Colombian Chaco region. The air is so humid it feels like a physical weight pressing against your lungs, thick with the scent of rotting vegetation and the sharp, chemical tang of resin. You are miles from any paved road, hidden under a canopy of mangroves so dense that even the midday sun only reaches the ground in fractured, sickly green needles of light. This is not a place where you would expect to find high-level naval engineering, but as you push aside a heavy branch, you see it. Resting in the mud is a sleek, long, and alien-looking hull. It looks like a primitive submarine, or perhaps a coffin for a giant. It is painted a dull, matte blue, the exact color of the deep Pacific at dusk. This is the birthplace of a ghost ship. In the world of modern smuggling, the days of the flamboyant cowboy pilots and the high-speed cigarette boats of the 1980s are largely a memory. The game has changed. It is no longer about outrunning the authorities. It is about becoming invisible. You are looking at the evolution of a multi-billion-dollar industry that has turned to the dark science of the seas to keep the white powder moving. You walk closer to the vessel, stepping over coils of electrical wire and discarded fiberglass scraps. There are no blueprints here, no computer-aided designs. The men building this ship are not naval architects with degrees from prestigious universities. They are master craftsmen, often recruited from legitimate shipyards or trained in secret, who build these vessels by hand in the middle of the jungle. They use wood for the framing and fiberglass for the hull because fiberglass does not reflect radar waves the way metal does. This ship is being built to be a ghost, a phantom that can slip through the most sophisticated net of surveillance in human history. Imagine yourself climbing into the hatch of this vessel. You have to squeeze your shoulders to fit through the narrow opening. Once inside, the atmosphere changes instantly. It is claustrophobic and suffocating. You are surrounded by the smell of raw polyester resin and unrefined diesel fuel. There is no room to stand up. You have to crouch or crawl over the tightly packed bales of cocaine that already line the floor. These bales, wrapped in layers of plastic and burlap, serve as your seat, your bed, and your only company for the next 2 weeks. This vessel is what the authorities call a self-propelled semi-submersible. It is not a true submarine because it cannot dive deep and stay there. Instead, it is designed to sit so low in the water that only the very top of the hull and a tiny exhaust pipe break the surface. From a distance of even a few hundred yards, it is virtually impossible to see. Even from the air, a pilot looking down into the vast, churning expanse of the ocean would likely mistake this matte blue sliver for a floating log or a trick of the light. As you sit in the pilot's seat, a cramped corner at the front of the vessel, you look at the controls. They are surprisingly simple. A basic steering wheel, a few analog gauges for engine temperature and oil pressure, and a commercial-grade satellite navigation system. This little screen is your only link to the outside world. It tells you where you are in the trackless waste of the Pacific or the Caribbean. You follow a series of waypoints, pre-programmed coordinates that take you far out into the deep water, away from the coastal patrols and the shipping lanes. The engine starts with a deafening roar that vibrates through your very bones. Because you are in a confined space with a massive diesel engine, the noise is constant and punishing. There is no soundproofing here. Every minute of every hour, the thrumming of the pistons beats against your eardrums. The temperature quickly rises to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You are sweating, and the salt from your skin mixes with the diesel fumes to create a stinging, greasy film over your entire body. You begin the journey. For the next 10 to 15 days, this will be your entire universe. You and 3 other men will live in this steel and fiberglass tube. There is no toilet, no kitchen, and no fresh air. You eat cold canned food and drink bottled water that has grown warm in the heat of the engine. You do not talk much because the noise of the engine makes conversation impossible. You simply stare at the GPS screen and keep the bow pointed toward the next coordinate. This is the science of the modern smuggle. It is a science of endurance and stealth. The cartels have invested millions into perfecting these designs. They have learned how to pipe the hot engine exhaust underwater so that it cools before it hits the air, robbing heat-seeking infrared cameras of their target. They have learned how to shape the hull to minimize the wake, ensuring that no white line of foam follows the boat to give away its position to a patrolling plane. But why go to such lengths? You might wonder why a criminal organization would spend up to $2 million on a boat that is designed to be used only once. The answer lies in the math of the trade. This vessel you are sitting in is carrying 6 tons of cocaine. In the jungle, that cargo might be worth $12 million. By the time you reach the coast of Mexico or the outskirts of San Diego, that same cargo is worth nearly $200 million. If the boat costs $2 million and the crew costs a few $100,000, the profit margin is still astronomical. The ship is disposable. It is a high-tech envelope for a very expensive letter. As you move through the water, you are constantly scanning the horizon through a tiny, reinforced glass window. You are looking for the white hull of a Coast Guard cutter or the silhouette of a naval destroyer. This is the ultimate game of cat and mouse. The authorities have satellites, long-range radar, and P-3 Orion tracking planes that can stay airborne for 14 hours at a time. They are looking for you. They use sophisticated algorithms to predict the routes of these ghost ships. They listen for the faint acoustic signature of your engine with underwater microphones. If you are spotted, the science of the smuggle takes a dark turn. You have been given very specific instructions. Near your feet there is a large wheel or a series of valves. These are the scuttling valves. If a Coast Guard boat begins to close in on you, your job is not to fight. You are not a soldier. You are a delivery man. Your job is to turn those valves. Within seconds, the ocean rushes into the hull. The heavy engine and the weight of the cargo pull the ship down like a stone. By the time the authorities reach your position, there is nothing left but 4 men bobbing in life jackets in the middle of the empty sea. The evidence, the millions of dollars of cocaine and the $2 million ship, is already sinking into the abyss, thousands of feet deep where no diver can reach it. Without the drugs as evidence, it is much harder for the authorities to prosecute you for smuggling. You might be detained, you might be deported, but the cartel lives to fight another day. They consider the loss of the ship and the cargo as merely a cost of doing business, a tax paid to the ocean. But the science does not stop at semi-submersibles. You have heard rumors of the true ghosts, the fully submersible narco-submarines. These are the holy grails of the smuggling world. They are built with double hulls and sophisticated ballast systems that allow them to submerge completely, hiding 20 or 30 feet below the waves. They are nearly impossible to detect from the surface or the air. They move slowly, silently, like sharks in the dark. These vessels are rare and expensive, representing the peak of the cartel's engineering capabilities. They represent a level of sophistication that rivals the navies of small nation-states. As your journey continues, you realize that the ocean is not just a barrier. It is a giant, three-dimensional warehouse. Smugglers now use GPS-linked buoys and torpedoes. These are streamlined containers packed with drugs that are bolted to the bottom of legitimate cargo ships by divers in the middle of the night. The captain of the ship might not even know he is carrying $10 million of cocaine on his hull. When the ship nears its destination, another team of divers detaches the torpedo, or the smugglers use a remote trigger to release it, where it floats just below the surface until it is picked up by a local fishing boat. The sheer scale of this maritime science is staggering. It is estimated that dozens of these ghost ships are moving through the water at any given time. They are the arteries of a global system that pumps hundreds of tons of powder every year. For every one that is caught, several more slip through the net. They arrive at secluded beaches in Central America, or they meet with fast boats in the middle of the Caribbean, transferring their cargo in frantic, mid-ocean handoffs. You look at the GPS one last time as the sun begins to set. You are hundreds of miles from land. The vastness of the water is terrifying, but it is also your greatest protection. The powder has built an empire that can afford to build its own navy, an empire that treats the laws of nations as mere obstacles to be engineered around. The ghost ship is the perfect symbol of this era. It is silent, it is hidden, and it is relentless. It is a product of the jungle and the high-tech lab, a marriage of primitive labor and modern physics. As the darkness falls over the Pacific, you realize that the war on drugs is no longer just a battle of police and gangs. It is a battle of technology and shadows. The ocean is full of secrets, and as you steer your blue hull through the waves, you are just one more ghost in the machine. A tiny part of a massive, invisible bridge made of fiberglass and white powder that stretches across the world. The science of modern smuggling has turned the sea itself into a weapon, a vast, unblinking eye that hides as much as it reveals. The journey you are on is a testament to the lengths humans will go to for the sake of the trade. It is a world where the stakes are measured in tons and billions, and where the most successful players are the ones you never see. The ghost ships keep moving, silent and low in the water, carving a path through the deep that no one can follow. You are part of a history that is still being written in the salt and the dark, a chapter where the powder has moved from the streets to the silent depths of the abyss. You stand at the edge of the world where the emerald green of the Amazon rainforest meets a sudden, jagged void. This is not a natural clearing. There are no ancient trees here, no hanging vines that have taken centuries to reach the forest floor. Instead, you see the raw, red earth of South America, exposed like an open wound under a sun that feels more like a heat lamp than a source of life. You can feel the humidity clinging to your skin, thick and heavy, but the air does not smell like rain or damp earth. It smells of gasoline. It smells of ammonia. It smells of a slow, systemic poisoning that has been happening for decades, long after the glamour of the powder has faded in the minds of those who consume it thousands of miles away. You are walking through the physical manifestation of a global addiction. To understand the history of cocaine, you must eventually look away from the mirrors and the mahogany desks of the elite and look down at the soil. You must look at the lasting scar that the white powder has carved into the very skin of the planet. This is the ecology of the shadow, a place where the demand for a few hours of euphoria translates into the permanent destruction of the most biodiverse places on Earth. As you step deeper into this cleared patch of land, you realize the scale of what has been lost. For every gram of cocaine that reaches a city in Europe or North America, several square meters of rainforest are razed to the ground. You are standing in what was once a cathedral of life, a place where jaguars prowled and rare birds nested. Now it is a monoculture of small, sturdy shrubs with bright green leaves. These are the coca plants. They look innocent enough, almost like common garden hedges, but they are the reason the forest had to die. Because this trade is illegal, the plantations cannot exist on established farmland. They must hide. They must push further and further into the virgin forest, up the steep slopes of the Andes and deep into the humid basins of the Amazon. You see the charred stumps of trees that were hundreds of years old, burned away to make room for a crop that will only be harvested for a few years before the thin soil is exhausted and the growers move on to kill another patch of forest. But the scar is not just about the trees that are gone. You follow a small, muddy trail away from the fields and toward the sound of running water. You expect to find a pristine mountain stream, the kind of water that sustains entire civilizations. Instead, you find a scene of quiet, chemical horror. Near the bank of the river, you see the remnants of a hidden laboratory. It is nothing more than a series of plastic tarps and blue barrels, but the smell is overwhelming. You realize that to turn those green leaves into the white powder you have been tracking through history, a violent alchemy must occur. You look at the ground around the barrels. The earth is slick and blackened. To process the coca leaves, the workers use thousands of gallons of gasoline, sulfuric acid, ammonia, and caustic soda. They use cement and lime and kerosene. These are not substances that belong in a jungle. They are industrial poisons. You watch as the runoff from a recent batch of coca paste trickles down the bank and into the clear water. There are no filters here. There are no environmental regulations in the shadow economy. The producers simply dump the toxic slurry directly into the watershed. You follow the river downstream in your mind, imagining the path of that poison. It flows into the arteries of the continent. It kills the microscopic life that forms the base of the food chain. It settles in the silt where the fish spawn. It enters the bodies of the people who live miles away, the indigenous communities who rely on these rivers for their drinking water and their food. You see the children with skin rashes and the fishermen pulling up empty nets. This is the hidden cost of the powder, a debt that the earth is paying in blood and oil. The ecology of South America has been rewritten by a drug that most of its inhabitants will never use. You move your gaze from the rural ruins to the modern shadow that stretches across the entire globe. The scar is not just ecological, it is structural. You are now walking through a different landscape, one of steel and glass and digital signals. You are in a modern city, perhaps London, perhaps New Paris, or maybe New York. The shadow has changed its shape here. It is no longer a matter of machetes and jungle labs, but of infrastructure and invisible traces. You look at the water flowing through the sewers beneath the city streets. Scientists have begun to test this water, and what they have found is a revelation of the modern shadow. The history of cocaine is no longer something you find in history books alone. It is something you find in the very metabolism of our cities. In some major European capitals, the concentration of cocaine metabolites in the wastewater is so high that it can be measured with startling precision. You are living in a society where the drug is so pervasive that it has become part of the water cycle. It is in the rivers that flow through our most civilized centers. It is a physical, measurable part of the urban environment. You realize that the powder has created a modern shadow that is almost impossible to escape. It has corrupted the very systems we use to move goods and information. You see the way the trade has adapted to the digital age. The shadow is now in the encrypted messages sent between hidden servers. It is in the complex laundering schemes that move billions of dollars through legitimate banks, staining the global economy with its presence. You see the way the drug trade has funded the development of semi-submersible submarines that haunt the depths of the ocean, and how it has influenced the design of logistics networks that span the globe. But the most profound scar is the one left on the human landscape. You walk through a neighborhood that has been hollowed out by the violence of the trade. You see the ghost of the dynasties that were corrupted, the families that were torn apart, and the political systems that were weakened by the sheer volume of money the powder generates. The modern shadow is a state of perpetual conflict. It is a war that never ends because the demand never dies. You see the way the trade creates a cycle of poverty and aspiration, where the only way out for some is to become part of the machine that is destroying their own land. You stand back and look at the whole picture now. The history of cocaine is a story of a plant that was once sacred, a leaf that was a gift from the gods to the people of the Andes. You see how that gift was taken, refined, and turned into a weapon of mass consumption. You see the path of the powder from the high mountain peaks to the dark alleys of the 1920s, through the neon-soaked boardrooms of the 1980s, and into the silent, digital transactions of today. The scar is permanent. Even if the trade were to vanish tomorrow, the forests would take centuries to return to their former glory. The rivers would carry the heavy metals and the chemical residues for generations. The social structures of entire nations have been bent out of shape to accommodate the pressure of this industry. You are looking at a world that has been physically and spiritually altered by a chemical. You realize that you are not just a witness to this history, you are part of the world it has created. The shadow is not something that exists only in far-off jungles or dangerous neighborhoods. It is in the water we drink, the economy we participate in, and the political realities we navigate. The powder that corrupted dynasties has ended up corrupting the very ground we walk on. As you look one last time at the jagged clearing in the Amazon, you see a small sprout of green pushing through the poisoned soil. It is a coca plant, resilient and stubborn. It reminds you that the cycle is not easily broken. The plant will continue to grow, the labs will continue to smoke, and the shadow will continue to stretch across the world until the story of the powder finds a new, different ending. But for now, you are standing in the middle of the scar, a witness to the profound and lasting impact of a substance that promised everything and cost the earth itself. The history of cocaine is not a closed book. It is a living, breathing, and often bleeding reality that defines the modern age. You see the powder not as a product, but as a force of nature that we have unleashed and can no longer control. The shadow is long, the scar is deep, and the world is forever changed by the white dust that rose from the earth to conquer the human heart.